"Oh, which senior of the Bai family is this? It looks like I really will have to pay him a visit," Hanley said with an intrigued expression. "This senior of our family is rather renowned in our holy realm, and he's cultivated the heaven refinement devilish arts to the extreme. He's only one step away from becoming a sacred ancestor, and he's known as Layman Fusion. Have you heard of him, Brother Han?" Bai Yunxin replied with a smile. "I haven't, but it would surely be a fantastic opportunity for me to receive guidance from a senior with such a high level of mastery in devilish body refinement techniques. I wasn't planning to go anywhere in particular next, so I'll accompany you to Illusion Night City. When are you planning to return to the city?" "I don't have too much time on my hands," Han Li replied in a calm manner. "Rest assured, Brother Han, we ventured into these plains solely for the purple spirit fruits. Now that we've obtained them, we'll head back to the city after resting for a few days to recover our magic power," Bai Yunxin replied with an ecstatic expression. Han Li nodded in response and didn't say anything further. After that, they settled down at a nearby small mountain and opened up a temporary cave abode to meditate in. 5 days later, after the members of the Bai family had recovered most of their magic power, they immediately released a giant flying arc that was over 100 feet in length, which carried them and Han Li back toward Illusion Night City. Several months later, there were 7 nascent soul stage devilish beings split up into 2 groups locked in an intense battle on the border of the plains. 3 of them were wearing yellow brocade robes and wielding 3 identical black flying daggers that were releasing black devilish flames. As for the other 4, they wore long white robes and were controlling 4 translucent white flying swords that were releasing bursts of snowflakes that swept forth in a frenzy. The devilish flames and glacial chi intertwined in midair before exploding into balls of devilish chi, and the 7 devilish beings appeared to be quite evenly matched. On the ground down below lay the carcass of what appeared to be a giant devilish mouse. It was over 100 feet in length with shimmering golden fur, and it was quite clear that this was no ordinary devilish beast. The 7 devilish beings were clearly fighting over this carcass. All of a sudden, a white-robed young man harumphed coldly as he suddenly patted a leather pouch that was hanging from his waist. A burst of black chi immediately surged out, then transformed into a menacing 2-headed devilish lion. The lion was entirely inky black in color and was around 50 to 60 feet tall. It opened its 2 mouths in unison, releasing countless inky black wind blades. The 3 flying daggers flashed incessantly in the face of the torrential downpour of wind blades, and they were forced onto the back foot by the 4 flying swords. The 3 yellow-robed devilish beings were stunned to see this, and a long-haired elderly man among them exclaimed, "That's a nightmare lion. You dare to bring out your family's guardian beast. Aren't you afraid of being punished if any harm were to befall this beast?" "He, 3 pieces of trash like you won't be able to harm our Ning family's guardian beast. If you know what's good for you, then piss off. I'm not handing over this Golden Dawn mouse to you," the white-robed young man who had released the devilish lion sneered. The long-haired elderly man's expression darkened significantly upon hearing this. One of the other yellow-robed men transmitted his voice to the long-haired elderly man. "Big brother, this situation is heavily against our favor. We should make a retreat." The elderly man hesitated for a long while before a determined look finally appeared on his face. "I've already been stuck at the late nascent soul stage for centuries, and this Golden Dawn mouse is extremely rare. Its inner core will be extremely important for me to make a breakthrough, so please lend me your assistance. If we succeed, you'll have my eternal gratitude." "What? Are you planning to unleash that secret technique? But if you do that, not only will your true essence be severely depleted, you'll be struck by a variety of negative aftereffects as well," the final yellow-robed man interjected in an alarmed manner. "If I can't progress to the deity transformation, then my life will be close to coming to an end, so I have no choice but to make this gamble," the elderly man said as he gritted his teeth. "In that case, we'll do everything in our power to protect you. Be careful, big brother. We'll try to stall the enemies for as long as possible." The other 2 yellow-robed men agreed in unison after exchanging a glance, and the elderly man naturally extended words of gratitude toward them. In the next instant, the 2 yellow-robed devilish men abruptly stepped forward, and the devilish flames around the 2 flying daggers they were controlling reared upon by about twofold. The 2 daggers then transformed into a pair of devilish pythons that managed to just barely withstand the attacks from the flying swords and devilish lion, but judging from their strained expressions, It was quite clear that they wouldn't be able to keep this up for too long. Meanwhile, the long-haired elderly man pointed a finger toward his own flying sword, and it flew back to him as a streak of black light before vanishing into his body in a flash. Immediately thereafter, he made a grabbing motion with both hands. Several thin and long blades that resembled wicker leaves appeared between his fingers. However, just as he was about to plunge these blades into his own dantian, spiritual light suddenly flashed in the distance, and a giant ball of light appeared before hurtling toward them at an incredible speed. The elderly man's heart jolted as he hurriedly stopped what he was doing and turned toward that direction. Within the ball of yellow light was a giant flying ark that was over 100 feet in length, and it was clearly not a flying treasure that a normal devilish being could possess. At the front of the ark stood several people, who were appraising the 7 combatants from afar. The elderly man's eyes immediately lit up with elation at the sight of this giant ark. "That's our family's vast yellow wood ark. Could it be that seniors of our family have just returned from the plains?" Everyone else stopped what they were doing as well, and the other 2 yellow-robed men were also looking on with elation, while the 4 white-robed devilish beings were far less ecstatic. After just a few flashes, the giant ark appeared in the air above the 7 devilish beings before drawing to a halt. Immediately thereafter, a cold female voice rang out. "Aren't you the 3 brothers from my 9th uncle's family? Why are you battling these people from the Ning family?" The one who had spoken was none other than Bai Yunxin, and she was accompanied at the front of the ark by her 2 brothers and Han Li. After several months of non-stop travel, they had finally reached the border of the plains and stumbled upon these battling devilish beings. Bai Yunxin immediately identified the 3 white-robed devilish men, and a hint of surprise appeared on her face. The long-haired elderly man's elation grew even more pronounced at the sight of Bai Yunxin, and he hurriedly replied, "Junior Bai Ming pays his respects to his seniors. These members of the Ning family are trying to take the Golden Dawn mouse that we killed. Please stand up for us, seniors." "Oh, Golden Dawn mice are quite rare. It's a brilliant stroke of luck that you were able to hunt one down at the border of these plains. This beast was slain by my juniors, so what right do you have to try and take it? Piss off," Bai Yunxin said in a cold voice as she turned toward the 4 white-robed devilish men. The 4 of them were naturally furious upon hearing this, and the young man who had released the 2-headed devilish lion opened his mouth to try and argue, but one of his companions immediately clamped a hand over his mouth to stop him. After that, they dragged him away and immediately fled from the scene. Bai Yunxin didn't pay any heed to this, and she turned to Han Li with a smile as she said, "Sorry you had to see that, Brother Han. That was just a conflict among some juniors. Seeing as we've already reached the border of the plains, we're not far away from Illusion Night City. Illusion Night City is situated between the plains and the Illusion Howl Desert, so we should arrive back at the city in about a month." "I see, but aside from Illusion Night City, I'm also very interested in the Illusion Howl Desert. I heard it's one of the most renowned restricted regions in our holy realm," Han Li replied with a calm smile. Bai Yunxin was rather taken aback to hear this, but she put on a slightly seductive smile and replied, "He, I didn't think that you'd be interested in the Illusion Howl Desert, Brother Han. It would indeed be extremely dangerous for people outside of Illusion Night City to venture into the desert. But if you're interested, I can tell you about it in greater detail during the rest of our journey." "That would be great," Han Li also replied with a smile. Thus, the giant ark continued onward, and Han Li and Bai Yunxin made their way toward the guest cabin of the ark. Meanwhile, Bai Yin and Bai Ying exchanged a knowing smile upon seeing this. As for the long-haired elderly man, he extended an elated bow toward the giant ark before descending onto the ground with his companions and began to dissect the Golden Dawn mouse carcass. As for whether they had slain the beast or were stealing the prey of the 4 members of the Ning family, that was no longer important. Chapter 2051, Illusion Night City. Around 5 to 6 days later, the giant ark finally flew out of the plains, and a vast mountain range appeared up ahead, comprised of a series of dark green mountains that stretched as far as the eyes could see. The giant ark flew into the mountain range, then vanished into the distance after just a few flashes. Around a month later, a giant city that had been constructed from a yellow stone material appeared in the distance within a basin. The city spanned an area of close to 1,000 kilometers, and half of it had been constructed next to a mountain, while the other half was surrounded by city walls that were over 1,000 feet tall. The entire city was enshrouded under a yellow light barrier, clearly indicating the presence of a profound super-restriction. Han Li stood at the front of the flying ark and appraised the city in the distance with a contemplative expression. This is Illusion Night City, Brother Han. It can't compare with the super cities of our holy realm, but it's quite a large city considering the secluded geographic location. There are over 10 devilish lords in the city, and our Bai family is one of the city's 4 major families. Regardless of whether you want to purchase something or if you encounter some trouble, you should be able to get a favorable outcome by revealing your ties with our Bai family, Bai Yunxin said with a smile. Thank you, Fairy Bai. I really was planning to purchase some things in the city, Han Li also replied with a smile. You're all by yourself anyway, so why don't you stay in our Bai family's guest pavilion, Brother Han? With your cultivation base, I'm sure the seniors of our family wouldn't object, Bai Yunxin proposed. Have you still not given up on recruiting me to your Bai family? Han Li chuckled upon hearing this. You've already reached the pinnacle of the late spatial tempering stage, and judging from how easily you were able to slay those devilish bats, you must be extremely close to progressing to the body integration stage. A vagrant cultivator of your powers would be eagerly sought after by any major power, and our Bai family is certainly no exception, Bai Yunxin replied with a completely unabashed smile. Unfortunately, I'll have to turn you down again. I have no intention of submitting to any power. I'm currently facing a major bottleneck, and I need to travel for some time for a chance to become a devilish lord. As such, I won't be joining any power for the next few centuries. However, I can promise you that if I do consider joining a certain power in the future, I'll definitely prioritize your Bai family in my consideration, Han Li replied. I'll hold you to your word then, Brother Han. The doors of our Bai family will always be open to you. As for your meeting with Senior Fusion, I'll get that arranged once we get back. Seeing as you saved our lives in the plains, there should be no issues arranging the meeting, Bai Yunxin sighed in a slightly forlorn manner. All of a sudden, Han Li changed the subject in a seemingly nonchalant manner. I heard that it would be best to have an 8-footed devilish lizard steed if one were to travel through the Illusion Howl Desert. Does your Bai family own any of these devilish beasts? 8-footed devilish lizards. Are you planning to enter the desert, Brother Han? Bai Yunxin was rather taken aback to hear this. Indeed, and walking through the desert would take far too long, Han Li replied in a calm manner. We do, but it's most likely not going to be possible for you to obtain one. None of the 4 major families in the city would be willing to sell any 8-footed devilish lizards to outsiders, Bai Yunxin said with furrowed brows. Oh, why is that? If the price is the issue, then I can assure you that I should be able to afford one, Han Li asked. You won't be able to purchase any of the devilish lizards no matter how many devil stones you offer. The rarity of these devilish beasts is one reason behind this, but most importantly, these devilish lizards form the basis of our major families, so they're extremely important to us, Bai Yunxin replied after a brief hesitation. What do you mean by that? Han Li was truly perplexed now. The reason behind this concerns a secret that I won't be able to disclose to you without permission from the seniors of our family. If you'd like, you can ask Senior Fusion about this when you meet him. If he decides to disclose this information to you, then there won't be any issues, and only the most important seniors of our family have the right to make decisions on these 8-footed devilish lizards, Bai Yunxin replied in a slightly guarded manner. I see. It looks like I'll have to speak to Senior Fusion if I want to obtain an 8-footed devilish lizard then, Han Li said in a contemplative manner. Bai Yunxin nodded in response and didn't say anything further. At this point, the giant ark had finally reached Illusion Night City, and it descended right in front of a city wall that was several hundred feet tall. There were some devilish beings entering and exiting the city, and all of them immediately gave the yellow ark a wide berth with awe and veneration in their eyes. It seemed that all of them recognized this giant ark. Han Li and the devilish beings of the Bai family emerged from the ark, and Bai Yunxin made a hand seal, upon which the giant ark shrank down into a tiny streak of yellow light that vanished into her body in a flash. After that, all of them made their way toward the city gate in an excited manner. Having been away from home for so long, they were naturally very glad to be back. As for Han Li, he wore a faint smile and wasn't eye-catching in the slightest as he made his way through the crowd. There were around a dozen armored guards standing in front of the city gate, and they immediately extended respectful bows toward Bai Yunxin's group, then stepped aside to grant them priority passage into the city. The passers-by paid no heed to this at all, clearly already accustomed to this discriminatory treatment. Bai Yunxin gave the guards a slight nod before leading the way into the city, upon which Han Li was immediately greeted by the sight of countless earthy yellow houses that stretched for as far as the eyes could see. There were several remarkably wide streets between these houses, far less so than in the average city. Furthermore, there was the occasional giant structure interspersed among these buildings, such as pagodas and multi-story pavilions. Han Li only briefly inspected his surroundings before withdrawing his gaze. Not only was there a flight restriction in the city, there was also an extremely potent spiritual sense restriction. Even with his enormous spiritual sense, he couldn't sense anything with good clarity more than several kilometers away. Of course, it wasn't that Han Li couldn't extend his spiritual sense further than that. However, if he were to do that, he would definitely trigger the restriction, thereby exposing his own cultivation base. Moments later, the group from the Bai family suddenly stopped after making their way onto a certain street. Han Li raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask any questions. Shortly thereafter, several carriages that were drawn by a dozen or so creatures that resembled both horses and deers arrived at the other end of the street, then quickly drew to a halt in front of Han Li and the others. All of the carriages had a Bai character emblazoned on the side, and each carriage was being driven by a man in a leather robe. The man on the first carriage jumped down before extending a respectful bow toward Bai Yunxin. "I pay my respects to the esteemed young mistress. I was sent here by master to take you home." Bai Yunxin nodded in response before turning to Han Li with a smile. "Brother Han, are you really not planning to visit our Bai family? If you return to the family with us, perhaps you'll be able to meet Senior Fusion today." "Thank you for the offer, but I plan to travel around in the city for now, so I'll pay your Bai family a visit another day," Han Li said with a smile, and he cupped his fist in a salute. "In that case, I won't keep you any longer. This jade pendant is something that I can be identified by. With this jade pendant, you'll be able to directly come and find me in our Bai family without being questioned," Bai Yunxin said with a slightly wistful look as she flipped her hand over to produce an azure jade badge, which she tossed toward Han Li. Han Li caught the jade pendant before taking a look at it, upon which he discovered that there were some crimson threads interwoven into its surface, indicating that it hadn't been refined using ordinary jade. There was an image of an ascending woman engraved onto the badge, and the woman bore a strong resemblance to Bai Yunxin. Han Li nodded as he stowed the jade pendant away, and the group from the Bai family departed on the beast-drawn carriages. As for Han Li, he immediately departed toward another street and disappeared into the crowd in the blink of an eye. Even though there weren't any sacred ancestors in Illusion Night City, it was naturally still quite renowned due to the presence of over 10 devilish lords, and the number of high-grade devilish beings in the city also far exceeded that of normal cities of this scale. In contrast with Blood Crow City, this city had far more buildings of all different types. Not only were there ordinary shops such as material and ingredient shops, there were also many dojos that taught specific devilish arts, which presented quite an intriguing sight to Han Li. These were similar to the dojos that taught different cultivation arts in the spirit realm, and Han Li couldn't help but wonder if these had always existed, or if the devilish beings had stolen the idea from the spirit realm. While passing by a tall pagoda, a hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes at the sight of the plaque hanging above the door. Chapter 2052, Myriad Slave Tower. The words Myriad Slave Tower were emblazoned in large devilish text on the plaque, and it was the first time that Han Li had seen a place like this. Thus, after a brief hesitation, he made his toward it with an intrigued expression. Upon entering the pagoda, he found himself in a grandiose hall. On either side of the hall were around a dozen devilish young women in silver palatial dresses, welcoming guests with elegant smiles. At the center of the hall was a row of intricate jade tables and chairs, and there was a black-robed middle-aged man who was serving 3 guests with a few of the devilish young women. Before Han Li even had a chance to inspect his surroundings, the middle-aged man caught sight of him and immediately rushed over to him after extending an apology to the other 3 guests. "Greetings, Senior. Is there anything I can do for you?" the middle-aged man asked in a respectful manner. He was a deity transformation stage devilish being, so he naturally didn't dare to give a powerful spatial tempering stage being like Han Li the Cold Shoulder. "What kind of establishment is this Myriad Slave Tower? I've never seen such a place anywhere else," Han Li asked. "This must be your first time visiting Illusion Night City. Indeed, our Myriad Slave Tower is very rare as it specializes in selling slaves and devilish beasts," the middle-aged replied. "Slaves and devilish beasts? Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. Indeed, those guests over there have come here to purchase some slaves. You can take a look as well if you're interested, Senior. As for devilish beasts, we only have some ordinary breeds, so you most likely wouldn't be interested in them, the middle-aged man introduced with a smile. In that case, I'll go take a look, Han Li replied with a nod. Great, please come with me, Senior. The middle-aged man immediately gestured for one of the young women to bring the 3 other devilish beings over, then led them all to a simple teleportation formation at the corner of the pagoda. The 3 guests were comprised of 2 handsome men and an elegant woman. They were only at the nascent soul stage, but they were only appraising Han Li with curiosity rather than awe and veneration. Han Li took a brief glance at them, to find that a nondescript Ning character had been emblazoned on each of their sleeves. Could they be from the Ning family? After everyone stepped onto the teleportation formation, the middle-aged man cast an incantation seal toward the edge of the formation, and they were all instantly teleported away. In the next instant, they reappeared within a similar teleportation formation on a different level of the pagoda. Han Li opened his eyes and immediately inspected his surroundings, upon which he discovered that there was a long and narrow bluestone passageway up ahead, situated between 2 stone walls with countless runes carved onto their surfaces, clearly indicating the presence of a restriction. On the other side of the passageway were several large golden gates, in front of each of which stood 2 burly armored guards. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the guards, upon which a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. These guards were all humanoid puppets. The middle-aged immediately led Han Li and the others out of the teleportation formation, then strode through the passageway and arrived at the nearest golden gate. The 2 puppets in front of the gate seemed to have sensed their arrival, and they turned toward the group as they brandished their halberds, looking as if they would attack anyone who dared to approach them. The middle-aged remained completely unflustered and flipped a hand over to produce a metal badge, then waved it forward while chanting a short and simple incantation. The cold light within the puppets' eyes instantly faded, and they also set down their halberds again. The 3 devilish beings from the Ning family paid no heed to this, but Han Li carefully inspected the pair of puppets with blue light flashing through his eyes, then suddenly asked in an intrigued voice. These puppets seem to even more powerful than the average nascent soul stage being, but the refinement method used on them seems to be quite special. Did your pagoda refine these puppets yourselves or purchase them from elsewhere? According to the information that he had gathered about the Elder Devil realm, these 2 puppets clearly hadn't been refined using any of the several types of common refinement techniques in the Elder Devil realm. The refinement method and materials used were both very crude, but the puppets' powers belied the rough craftsmanship, and that was quite interesting to Han Li. Indeed, the refinement method used for these devil crystal puppets was rather special. They can't be possessed and controlled by spiritual sense, but they can complete some simple tasks while being controlled by treasures prepared in advance. They were crafted using our pagoda's secret refinement technique that isn't sold anywhere else. But if you're interested, a deal isn't entirely non-negotiable, the middle-aged man replied with a smile. Devil crystal puppets, eh? I am indeed interested in them, but we'll discuss this later, Han Li replied in an indifferent manner. The middle-aged man was slightly disappointed to hear this, but he still maintained his smile as he replied, All right, then I'll be opening the gate now. Immediately thereafter, he strode over to the golden gate before pressing the metal badge against it. The golden gate opened on its own, and faint white light came spilling out from within. The middle-aged then stepped away to the side and made an inviting hand gesture. Even though the other 3 devilish beings were from the Ning family, they didn't dare to disrespect a spatial tempering stage being like Han Li, so they could wait for him to enter first. Han Li gave a slight nod before making his way through the gate. Beyond the gate were several formations of different sizes, which formed a series of cylindrical white light barriers, within which were trapped several tens of devilish men and women in different attire. All of them had faint devilish patterns on their faces, clearly indicating restrictions had been placed on their bodies. The ones with the highest cultivation bases among them were only at the core formation stage, while the weakest ones were only at the chi condensation stage. The middle-aged man was about to start talking again, but Han Li interjected, You can go now, I'll take a look here for myself. The middle-aged man naturally didn't dare to speak any further upon hearing this. In that case, I'll go and serve the other guests. Please pardon me, Senior. Thus, the middle-aged men made their way over to the people from the Ning family. Fellow Taoists, if you'd like to buy some servants, then these ones should be ideal. They're Earth Yin beings from deep within the Illusion Howl Desert, and not only are they all adept in Earth attribute devilish arts, once they reach maturity, all of them become handsome men and beautiful women. Most importantly, these ones possess decent aptitude and could be nurtured to the nascent soul stage with minimal effort. In fact, it's possible that they could even progress to the deity transformation stage. Han Li reflexively turned toward the Earth Yin beings upon hearing the term Illusion Howl Desert, and there, he discovered 8 disheveled young men and women who appeared to be around 13 to 14 years of age. They were all at the foundation establishment stage, yet seemed to be quite feeble. Earth Yin beings. That's quite rare to see in this pagoda, but do they really possess aptitude that's as good as you proclaim? A young man from the Ning family with red scales on his face asked in a skeptical manner. If you don't believe me, you're free to examine their bone age. Isn't it already sufficient testament to their aptitude that they were able to reach the foundation establishment stage at such a young age? The middle-aged replied in a confident manner. How do we know if your pagoda hasn't fed them some pills to tap into their latent potential? The woman from the Ning family asked with a smile. A wry smile appeared on the middle-aged man's face as he replied, "Those types of pills are all quite expensive. We wouldn't use them on some slaves. Besides, there are always telltale signs that can be detected to indicate consumption of such pills. Our pagoda wouldn't dare to risk offending your Ning family over something like this. If you're interested in them, you can take them right away after issuing the required devil stones." The 3 people from the Ning family seemed to have been convinced, and they began to negotiate a price, as opposed to continuing to linger on the topic of the Earth Yin beings' aptitude. Around 15 minutes later, they finally arrived at an agreement, and the woman from the Ning family issued a large sum of devil stones, then departed with the group of Earth Yin beings. Following their departure, the middle-aged man made his way back to Han Li in a respectful manner. "Have any of these slaves caught your eye, senior? If not, I can take you elsewhere. Perhaps there will be some other slaves that are more to your liking." "There's no need for that. I'm used to traveling alone anyway. Take me to see the devil crystal puppets that your pagoda is selling," Han Li replied. Chapter 2053, Female Slave. "In that case, I'll take you to the other level to examine the puppets," the middle-aged man immediately replied in an obedient manner. After that, he made his way out of the room, then waved his metal badge to close the gate before walking over to the teleportation formation through which they had come from. Han Li followed along in an expressionless manner, yet just as they were about to step onto the formation, a burst of buzzing rang out, following which several humanoid figures emerged amid a flash of white light. The middle-aged man's expression faltered slightly upon seeing this, and he peered into the formation, upon which his expression immediately darkened slightly. The people that had just appeared in the formation were comprised of 4 black-armored devilish guards, a brocade-robed elderly man, and a blue-robed young woman. The elderly man was at the deity transformation stage, while the young woman was at the core formation stage and was quite a beauty. However, she had a layer of black devilish patterns all over her body restrict her cultivation base, clearly indicating that she was a newly arrived slave. Han Li reflexively swept his spiritual sense toward the young woman, upon which his pupils abruptly contracted with incredulity. The elderly man's expression also darkened at the sight of the middle-aged, following which he greeted with a fake smile, "Greetings, shopkeeper Fang. Have you brought this guest here to pick out some slaves? If none of them were to his liking, I have some new slaves that may be of interest to him." "There's no need for that. Senior Han is more interested in the devil crystal puppets, so you can keep your slaves to yourself, shopkeeper Huang," the middle-aged replied in a cold voice, and they were clearly not on good terms. The elderly man's expression changed slightly upon hearing this before he turned to Han Li with a respectful salute. "Forgive me for my rudeness, Senior Han. If you're interested in the puppets, I have some exceptional ones that I can show you." "What are you trying to do, shopkeeper Huang? I'm serving Senior Han, and I have more than enough devil crystal puppets in my collection for Senior Han to choose from, so you should focus on what you're doing. Take this new slave of yours and, this slave has no trace of devilish chi in her body. She's not from our holy realm," the middle-aged man exclaimed as he turned his attention to the young woman. Have you only just figured that out? This woman is no ordinary slave, and I expended a lot of effort to acquire her. Setting that aside for now, I've seen the devil crystal puppets in your possession. They may be enough to fool some nascent soul stage beings, but they would surely be an insult to Senior Han's eyes, shopkeeper Huang chuckled. How dare you? The middle-aged man immediately flared up with rage, only for Han Li to suddenly raise a hand and interject. We'll talk about the devil crystal puppets later. How much are you selling her for? I'm taking her. Han Li pointed at the yellow-robed young woman as he spoke. My apologies, Senior, but she's already been taken by someone else, so I won't be able to sell her to you, the elderly man hurriedly said with an apologetic smile. Oh, can slaves be reserved in the Myriad Slave Tower? Han Li asked as he turned to the middle-aged man beside him. Absolutely not. Our pagoda has always operated on a first-come, first-served basis. Shopkeeper Huang, why can't you sell this slave to Senior Han? Are you worried that he won't be able to afford her? The middle-aged man asked with a smile. This is a slave that was requested by Senior Zhao Wenhao. If I hand her over to someone else, who's going to answer to Senior Zhao? The elderly man snapped. What? This slave was requested by Senior Zhao. The middle-aged man drew a sharp breath upon hearing this before turning to the young woman with a hesitant expression. Who is this Zhao Wenhao? Han Li asked in a calm manner. The middle-aged man faltered slightly before replying with a forced smile. Senior Zhao is the master of the Zhao family. It would not be wise to offend him over a mere core formation stage slave. The master of the Zhao family. He must be a spatial tempering cultivator as well then. In any case, I'm taking her. If he has any objections, then he can come and find me himself, Han Li replied with a cold smile. Both the middle-aged man and elderly man's expressions changed upon seeing this. The middle-aged man still wanted to say something further, but Han Li abruptly strode forward and appeared between the four armored guards in a flash, then reached out to grab onto the young woman's arm before reappearing in his original spot in a flash. Everything had taken place in the span of just a single breath. The elderly man faltered slightly before immediately flaring up with rage. What is the meaning of this, Senior? Are you planning to take a slave from our pagoda by force? You may be a spatial tempering stage being, but our pagoda is not to be messed with either. The four devilish guards hurriedly raised their weapons in a wary manner, and the middle-aged man reflexively took a couple of steps backward before opening his mouth to say something, but decided against it in the end. As for the yellow-robed young woman, she was looking up at Han Li with a perplexed expression. Han Li completely ignored the elderly man's threat and instantly injected a wisp of magic power into the young woman's body through her arm, upon which his expression changed drastically. There's no mistaking it. It really is that cultivation art. If you can't make a decision on this, then shut up. I'll find someone else who can make the decision for myself. Han Li harumphed coldly as an extremely fearsome aura erupted from his body, picking up the two deity transformation stage devilish beings and hurling them back over 100 feet. Only after their backs had crashed into the walls of the pagoda did they manage to steady themselves, but their faces had turned completely pale and their eyes were filled with astonishment. As for the four devilish guards, they were instantly slammed onto the ground and completely immobilized by the devastating aura. Han Li had made an effort to protect the yellow-robed young woman, so she remained unaffected, but she was also completely dumbstruck. The aura emanating from Han Li's body continued to swell drastically, and it encompassed the entire pagoda. All of the restrictions in the pagoda began to tremor in the face of his terrifying aura, and loud sirens had begun to blare. Such a loud commotion, naturally, alerted the more powerful devilish beings in the pagoda. There were two devilish elderly men meditating in a secret chamber on the highest level of the pagoda, and as soon as they sensed this aura, they immediately sprang up before flying out of the secret chamber as quickly as they could. Moments later, a pair of spatial tempering stage elderly men had appeared before Han Li, and they were respectfully referring to Han Li as a devilish lord right before the incredulous eyes of the two shopkeepers. At this point, Han Li had already withdrawn his immense aura, and he appraised the two spatial tempering stage elderly men coldly as he said, I want to buy her. Do you have any objections? Of course not. It's an immense honor for her to catch the interest of an esteemed devilish lord like you, Senior. If you want her, you can have her free of charge, one of the elderly men said, and his companion nodded eagerly in agreement. These two were naturally aware that all devilish lords were old monsters who had lived for countless years, and most of them had very peculiar personalities, so they certainly didn't dare to display any disrespect. It wouldn't be right of me to take her for free. Here are some devil stones. Aside from that, there's something else I want to discuss with you too. Han Li chuckled as he raised a sleeve to release a storage bracelet that was filled with devil stones. One of the elderly men caught the storage bracelet, and he didn't dare to return it, so he could only stow it away. What can we do for you, Senior? As long as it's within our capabilities, we definitely won't refuse. I have something else I need to attend to for now, so we'll discuss this later. I hope your pagoda will satisfy me again when I return next time, Han Li said. As soon as his voice trailed off, black light erupted from his body, sweeping up the yellow-robed young woman before flying toward one of the walls of the pagoda as a streak of light. A resounding boom rang out, and the streak of light easily pierced through the restrictions on the wall before vanishing in a flash. The two spatial tempering stage elderly men could only exchange a wry smile upon seeing this. Chapter 2054, Encountering the Maiden Cultivation Art Again. Even though the Myriad Slave Tower had no lack of devilish lord-level elders, there wasn't such a powerful being in the Illusion Night City branch. As such, the two spatial tempering stage elderly men naturally didn't dare to offend Han Li when they knew nothing about him. In a sense, a devilish lord of unknown origins was even more worthy of fear in their eyes than the patriarchs of the four major families. As soon as Han Li left, the brocade-robed elderly man hurriedly made his way toward the pair of spatial tempering stage devilish beings. Elders, the slave that was just taken was reserved by the master of the Zhao family. If we let that senior take her away just like that, then I won't be able to answer to the Zhao family. She was reserved by Zhao Wenhao. That is indeed quite troublesome. Did you already take a deposit from him? One of the elderly men asked as his brows furrowed slightly. No, but he came to our pagoda several months ago and specifically requested a young human female cultivator at the core formation stage or above, and he expressed a willingness to issue a large batch of devil stones for such a slave. There are precedents of similar arrangements made in the past, so I agreed, the brocade-robed elderly man hurriedly explained. That may be the case, but no deposit was issued, so we're not obliged to sell her to the Zhao family. If he insists on acquiring a slave of her specifications, then we'll just have to take some time and source another one for him, the other spatial tempering stage elderly man said as he stroked his beard calmly. Indeed, we'll leave it to you to sort things out with the Zhao family. Don't offend the Zhao family, but definitely don't incur the wrath of that senior Han, either. The two of us have to go back to meditate now. We'll leave everything to you too, the first spatial tempering stage elderly man said before the two of them stepped into the nearby teleportation formation together. Yes, elders. The brocade-robed elderly man's expression was quite strained, but the middle-aged man was taking great pleasure in his misfortune as both of them bowed in unison. By the way, if that senior Han returns to our pagoda, then notify us right away so we can attend to him in person. One of the elders instructed right as the teleportation formation was about to be activated. Yes. The two shopkeepers extended respectful bows once again, following which the pair of spatial tempering stage elders vanished from the formation amid a flash of white light. He, looks like you'll have your hands full, Brother Huang. Having said that, you have some strong ties with the Zhao family, so I'm sure you'll be able to handle this. The middle-aged man chuckled before also teleporting away. The brocade-robed elderly man's expression darkened even further, and he stood on the spot for a long while before grumbling to himself. Looks like I'll have no choice but to pay the Zhao family a visit to explain the situation and find another slave that fits his requirements, but that's not going to be easy. Meanwhile, Han Li had already gotten onto a small beast-drawn carriage with the yellow-robed young woman, and the carriage was racing along the street. Han Li sat at the center of the carriage, meditating with his eyes closed, while the yellow-robed young woman was cowering in a corner, surreptitiously appraising Han Li with a fearful expression. Following what had happened in the Myriad Slave Tower, she was naturally already aware that Han Li was a devilish lord. However, Han Li's youthful and ordinary appearance struck her with a sense of bewilderment. In any case, a body integration stage being was something that she had never thought that she would encounter. With him as her master, the final trace of hope she had harbored for making an escape was completely dashed. As such, she was plunged into a state of horror and despair, and she shuddered to imagine what unspeakable horrors awaited her. Han Li didn't use any secret technique to glean the young woman's thoughts, but he could roughly guess what she was thinking. He appeared to be quite calm and collected, but his emotions were also in a tumultuous state, and images of a white-robed beauty surfaced in his mind over and over again. Some of the images were quite blurry and indistinct, while others were crystal clear, as if they had been captured just a day ago. Even with Han Li's mental fortitude, he couldn't help but have his emotions swayed by these images. However, he didn't forcibly eradicate these images through the use of any secret techniques, and merely basked in the bittersweet sensation of missing a loved one. After a long while, the carriage finally stopped, and the driver's respectful voice rang out from outside. "Senior, we've arrived at your requested destination." Han Li took a deep breath to repress his tumultuous emotions as he opened his eyes, then made his way out of the carriage in an unhurried manner. Even though Han Li hadn't called out to her, the yellow-robed young woman still gritted her teeth and decided to follow along after a brief moment of hesitation. She was quite smart, and she knew that she was completely at Han Li's mercy, so it was in her best interest to act in an obedient manner. Otherwise, with Han Li's unfathomable cultivation base, there were countless ways for him to make her regret she had ever been born. Han Li tossed a devil stone to the coach driver, then cast his gaze forward as a pleased look appeared on his face. He was currently situated in front of a mountain face that was over 10,000 feet tall, and there were a series of pavilions and cave abodes constructed along the mountain face. At the very front of these buildings was a massive entrance that was several hundred feet tall, with a plaque that read, "Holy Spirit Courtyard," in large silver characters. Inside the pavilion was a black wooden table, upon which an elderly devilish man was taking a nap. There were several child servants standing in silence nearby, not daring to wake up the elderly devilish man. Han Li cast a cold gaze toward the elderly man, and his lips tremored slightly. In the next instant, the elderly sprang up from the table and hurriedly yelled, "Please forgive me for my rudeness, senior." He then immediately caught sight of Han Li and the yellow-robed young woman before rushing over to them with a wide smile. Not long after that, Han Li and the young woman appeared in a pavilion that had been constructed along the mountain face. Half of the pavilion was situated inside the stone face, while the other half was protruding out of the mountain, and it had been constructed with a restriction that could completely isolate the pavilion from the outside world, making it very popular among high-grade beings who like to travel alone. This Holy Spirit courtyard was specifically designated for high-grade devilish beings to reside in, but the rental fees here were significantly more expensive than other similar places, so there weren't many high-grade devilish beings living here. Not long ago, Han Li had used his spiritual sense to roughly assess all of the levels and the structure of the pavilion, and he had been quite pleased with what he had seen. Thus, he issued some devil stones to the elderly devilish man and rented this pavilion for an entire year. At this point, Han Li had activated all of the pavilion's restrictions and taken the young woman to the highest level, then sat down calmly onto a futon before indicating for the young woman to take a seat across from him. The young woman was naturally still feeling extremely uneasy, but she didn't dare to disobey his instructions. After that, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release several tens of formation flags, all of which vanished into the nearby space in a flash. In the next instant, an azure light barrier appeared to encompass the entire pavilion, and only then did Han Li turn toward the young woman with a smile before thrusting a palm toward her. An immense burst of magic power erupted out of his palm and instantly destroyed the restrictions within the young woman's body. As a result, the devilish symbols on her skin instantly vanished, and her magic power was free to circulate through her meridians again. She was naturally ecstatic to sense this, yet before she could say anything, Han Li asked, "What's your name?" "My name is Zhu Gyur," the young woman replied after only a brief hesitation. "I can see that you don't have any devilish chi within your body. You're a pure human, right? Did you enter this realm of your own volition, or were you captured and taken here from the spirit realm?" Han Li asked. "I guess you can say I entered this realm on my own," the young woman replied. Han Li was rather taken aback to hear this, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he asked, "How did you manage to do that? With your cultivation base, you don't possess the ability to traverse through space. Did you enter this realm with someone else?" "No, I entered this realm on my own." "I see, that's rather interesting. Who taught you the greater incarnation arts that you're using?" Han Li asked. The yellow-robed young woman hesitated momentarily before replying, "I see you've heard of this cultivation art, senior. It was taught to me by my mother." "Who is your mother, and how did she obtain this greater incarnation arts?" Han Li asked as his expression changed slightly. The yellow-robed young woman was clearly quite reluctant to answer this question. Chapter 2055, Small Spirit Sky. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he continued. You're currently in the reincarnation phase, so your true cultivation base isn't at the core formation stage, is it? I should have known that you'd be able to identify this considering you're aware of the existence of the greater incarnation arts. Zhu Guor conceded as her expression darkened slightly. What's your original cultivation base? Nascent soul stage or deity transformation stage? Han Li asked. Zhu Guor bit down on her lower lip for a moment before replying. I am at the nascent soul stage. If I hadn't been stuck in the reincarnation phase, then I wouldn't have been captured. I can see that you're truly quite young, yet you've already cultivated the greater incarnation arts to quite an impressive degree. Aside from your brilliant aptitude, I assume you must be receiving guidance from someone who's extremely adept at using the same cultivation art. Your mother must be at quite an advanced stage in this cultivation art as well, right? Han Li asked. Zhu Guor's expression changed a few times before she finally gritted her teeth and said, If you want to ask about me, then I can tell you anything you want to know, but if you want to ask about my mother, then I have nothing to say. Oh, you're a very good daughter, but do you think I won't be able to find out just because you refuse to tell me? Han Li asked with a faint smile. A thought immediately occurred to the young woman upon hearing this, and her face turned deathly pale as she drastically sped up the circulation of her own true essence, as if she really were planning to self-detonate at any moment. If you're going to use a soul search technique on me, then I'd sooner detonate my own nascent soul than let you have your way. However, Han Li merely chuckled. You'll have to ask for my permission if you want to self-detonate in my presence. As soon as his voice trailed off, he swept a sleeve toward the young woman in a nonchalant manner, releasing a burst of gray light that encompassed her entire body. As a result, Zhu Guor was instantly immobilized and rendered completely unable to muster up any magic power. The true essence that she had gathered in her dantian had also completely faded, so self-detonation was completely out of her grasp. What did you do to me? Zhu Guor yelled in rage and horror. Nothing, all I want is for you to answer my questions truthfully. Now then, look into my eyes, Han Li said in a calm voice. What? Your eyes? Zhu Guor was quite young, but she still knew that she definitely shouldn't follow Han Li's instructions. However, she found herself completely unable to resist his wishes as she raised her head to meet his gaze. All of a sudden, blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and Zhu Guor's consciousness immediately began to fade as her eyelids suddenly became extraordinarily heavy. However, before she could do anything, she had already fallen unconscious. Han Li's expression remained unchanged upon seeing this, and he cast an incantation seal toward Zhu Guor, while the blue light in his eyes became even brighter. If one could peer into Zhu Guor's body right now, they discover that her nascent soul had been completely bound by layers of gray light threads, and it was also in an unconscious state. In the instant that the azure incantation seal vanished into Zhu Guor's body, her eyelids fluttered as she opened her eyes again, but they were completely glazed over and as lifeless as those of a puppet. Where did you learn your greater incarnation arts from? Han Li asked in a compelling voice as blue light flickered within his eyes. From my mother, Zhu Guor replied in a clear voice despite her wooden expression. Who normally instructs you in your cultivation? Is your mother using the same cultivation art? My mother instructs me, but she cultivates the clear chi arts instead. Han Li was rather surprised to hear this, but his tone remained unchanged as he asked, Clear chi arts? That's quite common among Buddhist cultivators. What cultivation base is your mother at? She must possess quite an advanced cultivation base for her to be able to instruct you in the greater incarnation arts even without cultivating it herself. My mother is only at the nascent soul stage. As for her ability to guide me, Zhu Guor's voice suddenly trailed off here as a slightly lost look appeared on her face. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this, and he immediately asked, Is there something out of the ordinary about the way that your mother is instructing you? Indeed, everything was quite normal before I reached the nascent soul stage, but after that, my mother is often unable to answer my cultivation questions on the spot and can only provide answers several days later. I suspect that there's a master of the greater incarnation arts behind my mother. Han Li's heart rate immediately began to speed up upon hearing this. Have you asked your mother whether this is the case? I have on many occasions, but my mother always denied it. What is your mother's name and what does she look like? Han Li asked with furrowed brows. My mother is Ling Feixian, and she bears a strong resemblance to me, Zhu Guor replied. Han Li fell into silent contemplation for a long while upon hearing this before finally shaking his head as he murmured something to himself. After a while, a thought occurred to him, and he asked, "How did you enter the Elder Devil realm, and where did you come from before you came here?" "I was being pursued by enemies and accidentally fell into a spatial rift to enter the Elder Devil realm. Prior to this, I was from the small spirit sky," Zhu Guo replied. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this. "Small spirit sky, where is that?" "The small spirit sky is the small spirit sky," Zhu Guo replied. Han Li's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this, and after a long while he heaved a faint sigh as he murmured to himself, "So be it, I'll just have to gather this information myself." As soon as his voice trailed off, he switched to a different hand seal, and a translucent thread shot forth out of his glabella before vanishing into Zhu Guo's forehead in a flash. After that, the blue light in Han Li's eyes became even more pronounced. Zhu Guo was only at the nascent soul stage, so Han Li was naturally being very careful in his soul inspection to avoid harming her. After around 15 minutes, Han Li easily procured all of the information that he wanted, and the translucent thread shot back into his glabella. As soon as the translucent thread vanished, Zhu Guo collapsed onto the ground and fell into a deep sleep. Han Li smiled upon seeing this, then closed his eyes as he began to process the information he had obtained from her. Shortly thereafter, he reopened his eyes and murmured to himself in a stunned manner, "So this small spirit sky is a fragmented realm like the vast glacial realm, and there are over 100 million humans residing within it. That's truly very unexpected." Indeed, as it turned out, the small spirit sky was an independent realm that was once a fragment of another realm. According to what he had seen in Zhu Guo's memories, the realm seemed to be around the same size as the vast glacial realm, but the spiritual qi within the realm was even less abundant than that in the spirit realm. There seemed to be around 7 or 8 foreign races residing in the small spirit sky alongside the human race, and what was quite surprising was that many of the people in the realm had ended up there after while attempting to ascend to the spirit realm from lower realms. As such, there was a very good chance that Nangongwan could be there, and that would also explain why he had been unable to find any leads on her whereabouts in the spirit realm. Even with his current level of mental fortitude, the thought of his beloved wife still lit a fire within his heart, and he wanted nothing more than to travel to Nangongwan's side right away so they could be reunited. Only after a long while did he finally manage to recover from his tumultuous emotional state, but his expression instantly darkened again as he considered the issue of how he was going to get to the small spirit sky. In contrast with the vast glacial realm, the small spirit sky was a realm that was constantly slowly moving through space, so it was virtually a matter of complete luck whether he would be able to find an entrance into the realm. And Zhu Guo's arrival into the Elder Devil realm through that spatial rift was also purely by chance. However, this information had all been derived from Zhu Guo's memories. As for whether it was all true, he would have to do some more research. However, seeing as Zhu Guo was able to accidentally enter the Elder Devil realm, there had to be people from the small spirit sky who had stumbled into the spirit realm, so he should be able to find some relevant information. After taking a deep breath to calm himself down, Han Li cast his gaze toward Zhu Guo again. He wasn't completely sure that her greater incarnation arts had been bestowed upon her by Nangongwan, but there was a very good chance that this was the case. After all, he had been in the spirit realm for a very long time, and he had never heard of any human sect that possessed such a cultivation art. It seemed that this cultivation art was extremely rare, and the masked moon sect had to have obtained it through an enormous stroke of luck. Chapter 2056, Layman Fusion. After thinking through all these matters, Han Li heaved a faint forlorn sigh, then flicked a finger toward Zhu Guo. A ball of azure light was expelled before vanishing into her body in a flash, and her eyelids fluttered before she slowly awakened. However, as soon as she recalled how she had fallen unconscious, she immediately sat up with a dark expression. "Did you search my soul?" she asked as she glared at Han Li. "If I didn't search your soul, how would I have found the information I wanted? Rest assured, I only obtained the specific pieces of information that I'm interested in, and I didn't harm your soul during the process. It came as quite a surprise to me to learn that you're from the small spirit sky as opposed to the spirit realm," Han Li said in a calm manner. Zhu Guo bit down on her lower lip upon hearing mention of the small spirit sky, and she didn't say anything. "I've already planted a restriction in your body, so act as my servant for now here in Illusion Night City. If you serve me well, I can consider freeing you when I leave the city. You can go and find a room to rest in now. Don't come to me unless it's an important matter. Also, you have to start referring to me as master from now on," Han Li continued in a nonchalant manner. "Yes, master. I'll be taking my leave now." Zhu Gyur could only reply in a resigned voice before extending a curtsy toward Han Li, then obediently departed. She was well aware that it would be both futile and foolish to try and resist a body integration stage devilish lord. However, judging from her dejected expression, it was clear that she wasn't very hopeful that Han Li would fulfill his promise. Following Zhu Gyur's departure, Han Li looked up at the ceiling and became engrossed in his own thoughts once again. For the next 3 days, Han Li remained on the top level of the pavilion to meditate and didn't go anywhere else. However, on the 4th day, someone came to see him. "Did the master of the Zhao family send a messenger?" Han Li asked as he raised an eyebrow. Zhu Gyur replied, "Yes, master. An elder of the Zhao family just delivered a message, and he insisted that I relay it to you." "Let me take a look." Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he made a grabbing motion to draw the letter into his grasp, then gently opened it. A ball of golden light immediately erupted out of the letter, before transforming into the projection of a graceful and refined middle-aged man. The man had black scales on the corners of his eyes and a pair of golden pupils. It was none other than the master of the Zhao family. The projection cupped its fist in a salute toward Han Li, then relayed 2 things in a polite manner. The first thing was that he had heard from shopkeeper Huang of the Myriad Slave Tower about the arrival of Han Li, and he wished to befriend Han Li while explicitly stating that the Zhao family wouldn't hold any grudge against him over a mere slave. The second thing was that the Zhao family was going to hold a ceremony to worship their ancestors in a month, and he was inviting Han Li to attend as a guest. After that, the projection extended another salute toward Han Li before fading into nothingness, leaving only the letter behind. Han Li looked down at the letter to find that it was covered in black devilish symbols with a shimmering golden Zhao character at the center. He rubbed his hands together expressionlessly, and a ball of silver flames emerged to instantly incinerate the letter into ashes. "When the Zhao family sends someone for a reply from me, tell them I accept their invitation," Han Li instructed. "Yes, master," Zhu Gyur replied before taking her leave. Han Li closed his eyes again to meditate, but to his surprise, he was paid another visit by Zhu Gyur the very next day, who informed him that a woman with the Bai surname had come to visit him. Han Li immediately guessed that this was most likely Bai Yunxin. It seemed that the Bai family had become aware of his status as a devilish lord, after all. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so eager to pay him this visit. Even so, Han Li had no intention of turning away. Thus, he instructed Zhu Gyur to take her to the hall on the 1st floor, and only after a while did he make his way down from the top floor in an unhurried manner. As soon as he arrived at the hall on the 1st floor, he discovered that it was indeed Bai Yunxin who had come to visit him, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, "Greetings, Fairy Bai. Please forgive me for my tardiness." Han Li released his body integration stage aura, without making any attempt to disguise it as he spoke. Bai Yunxin swept her spiritual sense toward Han Li, upon which she immediately stood up from her seat before hurriedly extending a curtsy. "I was unaware that you were a devilish lord, Senior Han. Please forgive me for any offense I may have caused you." "You didn't know, so you're not to blame. I disguised my own aura precisely because I was worried that you would be too stiff and reserved if you had known the truth." Han Li chuckled as he motioned for Bai Yunxin to take a seat, and he also calmly made his way over to the main seat before sitting down himself. Bai Yunxin's heart eased slightly upon hearing this, but she still didn't dare to sit down as she extended words of gratitude toward Han Li in a careful manner. Han Li didn't force the issue any further and allowed her to remain standing as he asked, "You didn't come here just to apologize, did you, fellow Taoist Bai?" "Indeed, Senior. I had already informed Senior Fusion of your arrival in the city, and I was sent here to extend an invitation to you on Senior Fusion's behalf," Bai Yunxin replied. "I see. In that case, I would be more than happy to meet fellow Taoist Fusion. Please lead the way, fellow Taoist Bai," Han Li said with a nod. Bai Yunxin was ecstatic to hear this, and she immediately gave an affirmative response. Han Li instructed Zhu Gyur to remain in the pavilion, while he followed Bai Yunxin out of the room. When they arrived at the massive entrance, there was already a giant carriage being drawn by 8 unicorns waiting for them. There was a purple banner with an inky black Bai character emblazoned on its surface protruding from the top of the carriage. And it was clear that this was a carriage that the Bai family reserved for esteemed guests. On either side of the carriage were 16 black-armored guards atop two-headed giant wolf steeds, all of which were also clad in suits of black armor. The guards were each carrying two huge swords on their backs, and they were all at the deity transformation stage. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he glanced at these armored guards, and Bai Yunxin smiled as she introduced, "These baleful tiger guards are the elite guards trained by our Bai family. All of them have once lived along on the plains for over 100 years and have slain countless devilish beasts. What do you think, Senior Han? They seem to be no less powerful than the elite guards of major cities." Han Li replied with a nod before making his way into the carriage, where he sat down and closed his eyes. Bai Yunxin naturally didn't dare to ask any further questions, and she also got onto the carriage before issuing an instruction. The carriage immediately set off, with the 16 baleful tiger guards following along close to the sides. All of the ordinary devilish beings on the streets immediately parted for the carriage and armored guards, with reverent and envious looks in their eyes. Thus, the carriage raced along without any impediment, and after several hours, it finally drew to a halt in front of a fortress within the city. Han Li emerged from the carriage, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes as he cast his gaze toward the fortress. This was naturally where the Bai family was situated, and not only was the entire fortress completely seamless, its walls were as smooth as jade virtually without any gaps. On top of that, the material used for the walls was neither metallic nor jade in nature, and he couldn't identify exactly what it was even with his vast wealth of knowledge and experience. Judging from the menacing aura being given off by the fortress, so it was clearly laden with restrictions and definitely wasn't as simple as it appeared. Directly in front of the fortress was a giant gate that was over 1,000 feet tall, and on either of it were several tens of devilish beast statues of different sizes, creating a long path. All of the statues were dull and black, but they were extremely lifelike, and there were also 8 yellow-robed devilish beings standing in front of the gate in an expressionless manner. Under Bai Yunxin's guidance, Han Li strolled through the gate past the slightly bewildered yellow-robed devilish beings, and around 15 minutes later, Han Li was seated on a purple chair in a hall with antiquated decor, sipping from a silver teacup. A fragrant scent was emanating out of the cup, and there were 4 extremely beautiful devilish female servants standing off to the side in an extremely respectful manner. Bai Yunxin was currently nowhere to be seen, and the entire hall was completely silent. A short while later, gentle footsteps suddenly rang out from outside the hall, and a person strode into the room in a graceful manner. The newcomer turned to Han Li with a faint smile and said, "I am Layman Fusion. It's a pleasure to have you at our Bai family, fellow Taoist Han." "Your Layman Fusion?" Han Li asked in a slightly dumbstruck manner. Chapter 2057, Trouble. The person who had walked in was a tall and slender purple-haired woman who appeared to be in her 20s with a short white horn on her forehead. She had a graceful disposition and was appraising Han Li with a faint smile. The appearance of this Layman Fusion had truly come as a surprise to Han Li. "Were you not aware that I'm a woman, fellow Taoist Han?" The purple-haired woman chuckled. "Indeed, fellow Taoist Bai Yunxin didn't mention this to me. Please forgive me for my rudeness," Han Li said as he cupped his fist in a salute toward the woman, and his expression immediately returned to normal, but there was still a hint of shock in his eyes. "That's all right, this isn't the first time this has happened to me. After all, the title of Layman Fusion is quite prone to causing misunderstandings. It's just that the past patriarchs of our Bai family had all been referred to as such, so it wouldn't be right of me to change the title," the woman explained with a smile. Han Li was quite enlightened upon hearing this. There were indeed some families in which certain titles were passed down in order to improve cohesion and as a piece of heritage. This may seem like a bit of a gimmick, but it was actually quite effective in some cases. The purple-haired woman took a seat across from Han Li, then waved a hand to dismiss the servant in the room, all of whom obediently departed, making sure to close the door behind them. The woman swept her spiritual sense briefly over Han Li's body and said, "I heard from that junior of mine that you don't show yourself in public much. It's no wonder I've never heard of you. However, I can sense that you're very proficient in your devilish art. You must have become a devilish lord quite a while ago, right? Even I'm unable to ascertain your exact cultivation base. I cultivate in the Tao of Slaughter, so I'm always cultivating in the plains where there's an abundance of devilish beasts, and as a result, I don't interact much with others. As for the time I've spent as a devilish lord, I'm afraid you're wrong there. I only became a devilish lord several centuries ago. The only reason you're unable to ascertain my exact cultivation base is because I've cultivated a special secret technique, Han Li replied with a smile. At the same time, he also swept his spiritual sense toward layman Fusion, only to find that her cultivation base was completely unfathomable to him as well. It was clear that this woman either had an aura concealment treasure or had cultivated an ability of that nature. With Han Li's current level of power, there was surely no one of the same cultivation base who could possess magic power that was unfathomable to him, so that wasn't a viable alternative. The woman's heart jolted slightly upon hearing this, and a barely detectable hint of elation appeared on her face. The Tao of Slaughter. I haven't come into contact with devilish arts of that nature much, but I'm aware that all fellow Taoists who cultivate in the Tao of Slaughter possess combat prowess that's far superior to others of the same cultivation base. Devilish arts of the Tao of Slaughter are indeed very powerful, but they're also very difficult to cultivate. I'm aware that I won't be able to break through my current bottleneck through cultivation and slaying devilish beasts alone, and that's why I've decided to emerge from seclusion, Han Li explained. Han Li's words seemed to have resonated with the purple-haired woman, and she sighed in agreement. I'm not cultivating in the Tao of Slaughter, but I've also been stuck at my current bottleneck for over 1,000 years. Making progress after becoming a devilish lord is a very arduous task, and fortune often plays a big role. Han Li nodded before suddenly changing the subject. I've heard that the Illusion Howl Desert is a renowned restriction area in our holy realm, and I was planning to rest in this city for a few days before entering the desert to continue my cultivation. If I can encounter some opportunities in there, then that would naturally be ideal. Our Bai family isn't exactly a massive powerhouse, but we have some influence around these parts and we know quite a bit about the Illusion Howl Desert. If you need anything, feel free to tell me. I'll get my juniors to fulfill your needs as best as possible, the purple-haired woman said. In that case, I really do have something to ask of your Bai family, Han Li said with a smile. Oh, go ahead, fellow Taoist. As long as it's something within our Bai family's capabilities, I definitely won't turn you down, the woman replied. I heard that any being who enters the Illusion Howl Desert will be rendered unable to use any movement techniques, and that the only way to traverse through the desert is by walking, which would take 50 to 60 years. I intend to cultivate in the Illusion Howl Desert for a while, but I don't want to spend that much time in there, so I was planning to purchase an 8-footed devilish lizard from your Bai family as a steed. Would you be able to sell me one? Han Li asked in a straightforward manner. Truth be told, Yuner already told me about this earlier. The purple-haired woman sighed upon hearing this. Is this a difficult matter for you? Han Li asked as his eyes narrowed slightly. Let me put it this way. If anyone other than a devilish lord like you were to mention this to me, they would perhaps have already been evicted, the purple-haired woman replied. I had heard that 8-footed devilish lizards are extremely important to all of the major families in the city, and that they were strictly not for sale. Would you be able to explain to me why that is? Han Li asked as he stroked his own chin. Of course, the woman replied after a brief pause. 8-footed devilish lizards are very valuable. Their devilish cores, bones, and even blood and flesh can be used to refine a type of extremely rare chi refinement pill. However, that alone isn't enough for our major families to hold the lizards in such high regard. As I'm sure you're aware, Illusion Night City has only managed to exist here due to the minds and spirit medicines that can be found in this area. Sales of those items earn the city high yearly profits, which are enough to cover the costs of our major families. However, the city was founded here tens of thousands of years ago, and the nearby mines and spirit medicines have already been completely exhausted. As such, all of the specialty local products we currently produce are sourced from deep within the Illusion Howl Desert. Even though there's a good supply of such items in the desert, 8-footed devilish lizards are necessary to ensure that they're transported back to the city promptly and safely. Otherwise, with all of the perils present in the desert, it would be virtually impossible to make it back on foot. After all, the desert is a renowned restricted area even in the entire Holy Realm, and it's very difficult for the average person to enter and leave it at will. As much, the lizards are vital to our major families for their ability to traverse through the desert, and less lizards would mean less yearly profits for our families. I'm sure you can understand why we're so unwilling to part with them now, the woman explained. And Li's brows also furrowed slightly upon hearing this. This made things quite troublesome. The prosperity of these families hinged on these 8-footed devilish lizards, so it would be very difficult for him to source them through conventional means. As these thoughts appeared in his mind, Han Li reflexively glanced at the woman to find that there seemed to be something that she wanted to say, and a faint smile immediately appeared on his face. Fellow Taoist Fusion, you didn't turn me down outright, so there must be some margin for negotiation. How about you tell me what I have to do for you to sell an 8-footed devilish lizard to me? I'm sure the price alone isn't the issue here, right? The purple-haired woman faltered lightly upon hearing this before chuckling. It seems you're a very skilled observer, fellow Taoist. Han Li merely remained silent and awaited a response. The woman's smile faded upon hearing this, and after a brief pause she continued, if you had come 3 years ago, then there would have been no way that our Bai family would have sold an 8-footed devilish lizard to you, but now there's room for negotiation. Our Bai family has encountered some trouble, and we need someone of your powers to assist us. Oh, I'm sure you're not the only devilish lord in your Bai family. What kind of trouble could stump you? Han Li asked as his expression changed slightly. Truth be told, the issue lies in an extremely important mine in the Illusion How Desert that belongs to our Bai family. Several years ago, it was taken over by a devilish lord-level devilish beast. The beast is extremely powerful, and our Bai family has been unable to evict it, so we could only recruit other allies to help us. If you can lend us your assistance, then we'd stand a far better chance. If we succeed, I can give you an 8-footed devilish lizard as repayment, the woman replied with a wry smile. How many devilish lord-level allies have you already recruited? Han Li asked after a brief pause. I've already invited 2. In addition to myself and another grand elder of our Bai family, we have a total of 4 devilish lords thus far, the woman replied. Chapter 2058, Vast Yin Treasured Mirror. What kind of devilish beast could pose a threat to 4 devilish lords? Han Li asked as his brows furrowed slightly. This is a rather embarrassing story for me to tell, but I once faced the beast in battle once. However, I was unable to make out its exact appearance. It was enshrouded in a ball of green flames the entire time, so I could only see a rough outline, and it seems to be something that resembles both a rhinoceros and a cow. The beast possesses powerful fire attribute abilities that can virtually melt through space, and I was almost killed by it after being caught off guard, the purple-haired woman said in a serious manner. Fire attribute abilities. That is indeed rather troublesome. Once cultivated to the extreme, fire attribute abilities are far more destructive than abilities of other attributes. It's no wonder that you fell into such a perilous situation against it, Han Li said. There's no need to try and flatter me, Brother Han. Even if that devilish beast didn't possess fire attribute abilities, its powers would still be well beyond mine. I'm guessing it's most likely comparable in power to a pinnacle late-stage devilish lord, so we would only stand a chance after recruiting as many powerful allies as possible, the woman said with a wry smile. It's comparable to a late-stage devilish lord. No wonder you're being so cautious. What do you approximate our chance of success to be? Facing such a powerful devilish beast is no laughing matter. Perhaps I could be risking serious injury or even death, Han Li said with a grim expression. It would naturally be close to impossible to kill such a devilish beast, but if we only want to wound it and chase it away, then our chance of success should be around 60% to 70%. With your inclusion, I think that will increase to 90%, the woman immediately replied. Hee, you seem to have a great deal of confidence, Han Li chuckled. The purple-haired woman could see that Han Li was rather unconvinced, and she hurriedly explained, that's because the 2 allies we recruited are no less powerful than I am, and one of them cultivates glacial powers while the other possesses an extreme yin attribute treasure. Otherwise, I wouldn't dare to be so optimistic. If we still fail even after all this, then we may just have to give up on that mine. Han Li nodded with an enlightened expression before continuing. I see, that does indeed justify your confidence. However, there's still one thing I'd like you to explain to me. Go ahead, Brother Han, the purple-haired woman prompted with a smile. A devilish beast with that level of power should have already attained quite a high level of intelligence. Why has it taken over your family's mine? On top of that, your Bai family seems to hold this mine in very high regard. May I ask what kind of precious material the mine produces? Han Li asked in a calm manner. The mine produces firecloud stones of the highest quality. Not only is the mine very large in scale, the supply of firecloud stones within it is extremely abundant, so it can profit our Bai family for thousands of years, the woman explained. Firecloud stones. I see, then that devilish beast must have been trying to devour the true fire chi of the entire mind to further its cultivation, Han Li said with an enlightened nod. Indeed, only some special types of devilish beasts possess the innate ability to devour the true fire chi within such mind. If a normal being of our holy race were to attempt something like this, no matter how advanced their cultivation base may be, they would immediately self-detonate. This is why we're trying to recover the mine as soon as possible. Otherwise, once too much true fire chi is lost, the mine's value would depreciate significantly. If you're willing to assist us, our Bai family is willing to offer you an 8-footed devilish lizard and a large sum of devil stones as repayment regardless of whether we succeed or fail, the woman promised. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D698, letter 1D46. After a brief pause for contemplation, Han Li said, "It would be remiss of me to turn down such a sincere offer, but I must ask where this mine is located in the Illusion Howl Desert, and how long will it take to get there? If this is going to take too long, then I'm afraid I won't be able to join you." "Rest assured, Brother Han, it'll only take just over a month to get to the mine. Even if we get delayed slightly along the way, 3 months should be enough to make a return trip," the woman hurriedly replied. "In that case, I'll agree to this. When are we setting off?" Han Li said without any further hesitation. The purple-haired woman was naturally ecstatic to hear this. "Thank you, Brother Han. One of the 2 fellow Taoists I've invited has already arrived, but the other one will take around a month to get here. Once everyone's here, we'll set off right away." Han Li nodded and offered no response to this. After that, the purple-haired woman invited Han Li to move to the Bai family again and offered to cover all of his living costs during this period of time. But Han Li euphemistically turned her down again. The purple-haired woman didn't force the issue any further, and they began to discuss some cultivation experiences and insights. Han Li naturally wasn't going to refuse, and a conversation immediately ensued. To his surprise, he soon discovered that even though this layman Fusion was a woman, she had many unique insights when it came to body refinement techniques, and there were even many questions that he had about the Provenance true devil arts that were answered by her. This was something that he very rarely experienced when exchanging cultivation insights with other body integration cultivators of the spirit realm. However, this made sense considering his Provenance true devil arts had come from the elder devil realm, so it was no surprise that their body refinement techniques shared similarities. It couldn't be said that he had gained nothing out of conversing with other body integration cultivators in the past, but in terms of body refinement, they naturally couldn't compare with a devilish lord. Thus, Han Li became quite engrossed in the conversation, and they talked for over half a day. During this time, the purple-haired woman was also very surprised to discover that Han Li's knowledge and proficiency in body refinement techniques far exceeded her own, indicating that he definitely wasn't an ordinary devilish lord. The fact that her new ally was so powerful further exacerbated her elation, and she became even more polite toward Han Li. As day began to transition into night, Han Li stood up to take his leave. Such a short time naturally wasn't enough for 2 body integration stage beings to exchange all of their cultivation insights, so the purple-haired woman invited Han Li to come and continue their discussion during the next few days. Han Li thought about this for a moment before gladly agreeing. Only then did the purple-haired woman call for that beast-drawn carriage to take Han Li back to the pavilion he was staying in. Following Han Li's departure, the purple-haired woman sat back down in her chair, and her smile faded slightly. He took a sip of the spirit tea on the table, then suddenly said, "Big brother, what do you think is that man's cultivation base? With your vast yin-treasured mirror, you should have been able to see some things, right? You think far too highly of me, sister. That man is truly unfathomable and far more powerful than you think." All of a sudden, white light flashed from one of the walls of the hall, and it transformed into a white light barrier, following which a man who was holding a black rhomboid mirror emerged. As soon as the man appeared, he took a seat on the chair that Han Li had been seated in not too long ago. This was a burly man with a head of curls and faint yellow skin. There was also a short white horn on his forehead, and it was even bigger than that of the purple-haired woman. There was also a discernible resemblance between the two, so they were clearly related. The purple-haired woman's heart jolted as she asked in a bewildered manner, "Were you unable to glean his cultivation base, even with the vast yin-treasured mirror?" As you know, this vast yin-treasured mirror of mine was refined from an ice spirit of heaven and earth. However, its effect is greatly hampered when used on someone with an extreme yin attribute protective treasure or has cultivated a powerful glacial ability. On top of that, that man seems to possess immense spiritual sense. He most likely detected my presence but merely pretended not to have noticed me, the burly man said with a dark expression. What? He already noticed you. That's rather troublesome. I'll have to explain the situation to him next time we meet. Did you really not discover anything with your mirror? The purple-haired woman asked as her brows furrowed slightly. There's no need to explain anything. He pretended not to have noticed anything, and you can just do the same, but I won't be spying on him the next time you two meet. He's only staying in Illusion Night City for a short time, so there's no need for us to expend too much effort to try and befriend him. As for whether I discovered anything, of course I did. This vast yin-treasured mirror mine isn't a toy. Let me show you what I found. The burly man chuckled as he pointed a finger at the mirror, and it immediately rose up, hovering in midair as a ball of black light. The burly man then made a hand seal while pointing a finger at the ball of black light and chanted an incantation, upon which an image began to gradually appear within the ball of light. Chapter 2059, Entering the Illusion Howl Desert. The image depicted Han Li sitting in the hall, and even though there was no sound, the image was extremely vivid and lifelike, as if time had just been reversed. The burly man urged the purple-haired woman to pay attention, then flicked a finger toward the image, sending a speck of black light vanishing into it. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D633, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D4B7, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D455A. In the next instant, layers of light suddenly appeared over Han Li's body. The outermost layer was inky black in color, followed by a layer of purplish golden light, while the innermost layer was of a murky gray color. What's that? The purple-haired woman asked in an intrigued voice. This is the first time you've seen this vast yin secret technique, right? This indicates that fellow Taoist Han seems to be using some special cultivation arts. The outermost black layer represents the purest true devilish chi of our holy realm. That's very normal. Without this layer of black light, I'd have to wonder whether he's actually from our holy realm. As for the purplish golden light, it indicates that's using cultivating some kind of powerful body refinement devilish art. On top of that, he's already close to reaching the legendary golden bone purple marrow stage. Aside from some sacred ancestors, I've never heard of anyone who's been able to reach that level, the burly man introduced in a serious manner. The purple-haired woman's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. Golden bone purple marrow. Is his physical body really that powerful? Could it be that the vast yin-treasured mirror made a mistake? Most likely not. The effect of the vast yin-treasured mirror on that man is greatly hampered, but it wouldn't make such a grave error. On top of that, he's only close to reaching that level. Otherwise, that outermost layer of true devilish chi would have been completely absorbed into his body and meridians, so it wouldn't even show up in the mirror, the burly man sighed. Doesn't that mean that man would be able to crush most devilish lords with his physical prowess alone? Also, what's that layer of gray light? Is he also cultivating some other type of powerful ability? The purple-haired woman asked. Gray light represents something that even the vast yin-treasured mirror is unable to ascertain, but it's presumably something quite extraordinary as well. This is already the limit of my capabilities. If I had injected even more magic power into the mirror, then I would have run the risk of truly offending him, and that's certainly not worth it. However, seeing as he was able to notice me even while I was in the restriction, he must possess an immense spiritual sense as well, the burly man analyzed. The purple-haired woman was silent for a while before a wry smile appeared on her face. So he possesses an incredibly powerful physical body, abilities that even the mirror can't identify, and even his spiritual sense is that powerful. It seems like a freakish talent has come to our Illusion Night City. It's a good thing that he doesn't seem to intend to stay here for long, and our Bai family was the first one to befriend him. With his assistance, we should have no issues taking care of that devilish beast. From this perspective, this is indeed good news for us. This is a man that we definitely can't offend, but there's no need to try and recruit him to our family, either. With his unfathomable powers, there's no way a family like ours can contain him. Just make sure to exercise more caution when interacting with him in the future, the burly man said in a serious manner. I definitely will, the woman replied with a nod. Meanwhile, Han Li was seated in the beast-drawn carriage, inspecting a white crystal ball with a hint of a smile on his face. All of a sudden, a black light barrier erupted out of his body to encompass him entirely. following which he pointed a finger at his own glabella while tossing the crystal ball forward. Black light flashed from his glabella, and his third demonic eye appeared before blasting forth a golden pillar of light that struck the white crystal ball with unerring accuracy. In the next instant, the crystal ball began to shimmer with golden light before also releasing a golden light barrier. The light barrier was initially quite blurry and indistinct, but soon displayed a burly figure holding an antiquated rhomboid mirror. It was none other than the burly man from the Bai family. The man was in the process of casting an incantation seal toward the antiquated mirror, and Han Li appraised him briefly with a cold smile on his face before the third demonic eye on his glabella abruptly vanished. Just as this devilish lord of the Bai family had said, Han Li was able to almost instantly sense his presence through his enormous spiritual sense. He displayed no outward reaction, but he had also unleashed a secret technique to observe the man, and he was relieved to find that the man was only a mid-stage devilish lord. With the devilish chi from his provenance, true devil arts and devil fane bead, no one in the elder devil realm would be able to see through his disguise aside from sacred ancestors. The crystal ball reverted back to its original translucent appearance, and the projection of the burly man also vanished. Everything was dispelled in the blink of an eye, as if he hadn't done anything at all. After that, Han Li closed his eyes and began to meditate again. During the next few days, Han Li would visit the Bai family every day to exchange cultivation insights and experience with the purple-haired woman. Aside from body refinement techniques and normal devilish arts, they even discussed some secret techniques and obscure cultivation arts, and both of them benefited immensely from the conversations. During this period of time, Han Li had scoured the city and discovered that none of his companions had arrived. He was the first one to have made it to Illusion Night City. This was rather concerning to him, and he couldn't help but wonder if the others had encountered some trouble along the way. However, he wasn't overly concerned. After all, everyone in his group was very powerful even among body integration stage beings. Even if their covers were blown and they were surrounded by several devilish lords, they'd still at least be able to escape and ensure self-preservation. However, the issue surrounding the 8-footed devilish lizards was quite a problem. Even though he had been promised one by the Bai family, everyone else would have to secure devilish lizards for themselves through different avenues. However, all of them were old monsters who had lived for countless years, so Han Li was confident that they would be able to take care of this matter themselves. After assisting the Bai family, he would wait until everyone else arrived. During his period of time, the other two major families of the city had also been made aware of the arrival of Han Li, and they all extended invitations toward him. Han Li turned down all of these invitations in a euphemistic manner, but he attended the ancestral worship ceremony of the Zhao family. During the ceremony, he met a devilish lord-level Grand Elder of the Zhao family, and they shared a brief conversation. The Grand Elder of the Zhao family was a short and thin elderly man, and he was clearly quite relieved to hear that Han Li was only passing through the city and wouldn't be staying for long. Han Li was naturally aware of why the elderly man was displaying such a reaction, and after exchanging some more pleasantries, he departed from the Zhao family. After that, he didn't visit the Bai family either, but 10 days later, the purple-haired woman came to meet him. She informed him that the final ally she had recruited had finally arrived, and that she had decided to venture into the Illusion Howl Desert to chase away that devilish beast in 2 days. Han Li naturally had no objections to this, and the purple-robed woman immediately extended ecstatic words of gratitude before taking her leave. During the next 2 days, Han Li spent all his time meditating on the top floor of the pavilion to get himself into prime condition. He was confident that a devilish beast wouldn't be able to pose much threat to him, but he didn't want to make a fatal error due to a moment of complacency. 2 days later, Han Li issued some instructions to Zhu Gyur before traveling toward a certain city gate in a beast-drawn carriage. Several hours later, Han Li met up with the group from the Bai family on a hill outside the city. Aside from the purple-haired woman and burly man, there were 2 more devilish lords, as well as 6 spatial tempering stage devilish beings, one of whom was Bai Yunxin. The purple-haired woman greeted Han Li with a smile before introducing him to everyone else. Only then was Han Li made aware that the burly man was named Bai Zijiao, and that he was the elder brother of the purple-haired woman. As for the other 2 devilish lords, one of them was a rotund fatso who introduced himself as Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon. His entire body was covered in rolls of flabs, and his eyes were squashed down to a pair of narrow slits, making him resemble a fat pig far more so than a dragon. The other devilish lord was named Xianxia, and he was a middle-aged man wearing a green ghostly mask. There was white glacial chi emanating from his entire body, and one was struck by a bone-chilling sensation even by just getting close to him. Bai Zijia was very polite toward Han Li, but the fatso merely exchanged some aloof pleasantries with Han Li, while Han Kizi didn't say anything at all, as if he really had been carved out of a chunk of glacial ice. Han Li merely replied when spoken to, and didn't say anything further than that. Thus, not long after that, the group flew toward the Illusion Howl Desert. Chapter 2060. After flying for roughly 500,000 kilometers, a black line appeared in the distance. Upon getting closer, it became clear that this was a boundless desert. It was naturally none other than the Illusion Howl Desert. Han Li narrowed his eyes slightly as blue light flashed through his pupils, and he discovered that this was a gray desert that stretched as far as the eyes could see. Aside from some short shrubs, the desert was completely devoid of life, and it seemed to be no different from an ordinary desert aside from its peculiar color. The sky over the desert was quite dim and covered in dark yellow clouds. Even though the sky within and outside the desert were only separated by a fine line, it was as if they were two different worlds. After reaching close to 10 kilometers away from the desert, the burly man led everyone on a descent. From here onward, our movement techniques could fail, so we'll have to advance on 8-footed devilish lizards. Our Bai family only has around 30 8-footed devilish lizards in total, and all of them are extremely precious. We've brought 11 of them with us for this trip, and that's already out limit. Please make sure to look after them during this trip, and if we encounter any danger, withdraw them into your spirit beast bracelets right away to keep them safe," the burly man said as he cupped his fist in a salute. "Haha, rest assured, Brother Bai, we're all aware of how important these 8-footed devilish lizards are to your Bai family. However, why didn't you decide to bring along these juniors for this trip? If they had remained behind, you wouldn't have had to bring out so many 8-footed devilish lizards," Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon asked in a curious manner. "The 6 of them have a combination technique that makes their combined powers comparable to those of an early-stage devilish lord, so we decided to bring them along," the purple-haired woman explained with a smile. "I see, my apologies for jumping to conclusions," Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon replied with a nod. A peculiar look flashed through Han Kizi's eyes upon hearing this, but he didn't say anything in response. As for Han Li, he merely smiled and remained silent, but he was wondering if he would be able to secure these devilish lizards during this trip. However, the thought only occurred to him for an instant before it was abandoned. He was very confident in his own powers, but it was still too risky to face 4 devilish lords at once whom he knew nothing about. On top of that, plotting against the Bai family could alert the other major families of Illusion Night City to what he was doing, and that could attract powerful enemies, perhaps even sacred ancestors. Thus, it simply wouldn't be worth the risk. At this moment, the purple-haired woman flicked her wrist, and an azure bracelet flew forth before expelling a burst of 5-colored light, releasing 11 giant devilish beasts that were around 50 feet in length and roughly 20 feet tall. At first glance, they resembled massive lizards, but their bodies were entirely covered in black scales, and each of them had 8 identical thick legs. On top of that, there were shimmering silver saddles on the backs of these devilish beasts, so they were clearly already tamed. So these are 8-footed devilish lizards. Each of them is only releasing a core formation stage aura, and there doesn't seem to be anything special about them, Han Li thought to himself as he glanced at these devilish lizards. Everyone was given a devilish lizard and a beast-controlling badge by the burly man, and Han Li immediately flew onto his devilish lizard before looking down at it. The silver saddle had some simple devilish runes inscribed on its surface, and it was very comfortable to sit on. Han Li waved his beast-controlling badge toward the devilish lizard, and a streak of silver light shot forth before vanishing into the lizard's body in a flash. The devilish lizard let loose a low roar before immediately galloping forward, and even though it wasn't very fast, its 8 legs ensured a very smooth ride. The burly man and everyone else had already gone on ahead, and the line of 11 devilish lizards progressed toward the desert. The distance of less than 10 kilometers was covered in a short while, and as soon as the devilish lizards entered the desert, sand came billowing toward everyone from all directions. All of a sudden, silver light flashed from the saddles on the backs of the devilish lizards, creating a white barrier of light that kept all of the wind and sand at bay. However, Han Li didn't pay any heed to that. What had attracted his attention was that once they entered the desert, the 8-footed devilish lizards suddenly sped up by several-fold, and they had become even faster than galloping stallions. At the same time, a peculiar type of energy fluctuations was emanating from their bodies, allowing them to slowly absorb the scorching energy within the desert. In contrast, Han Li was struck by a burst of indescribable power as soon as he entered the desert, restricting his magic power by as much as 90%. On top of that, both devilish qi and spiritual qi were extremely sparse due to a certain type of chaotic power of heaven and earth that was rejecting both types of energy. The Illusion Howl Desert was certainly living up to its status as one of the restricted areas of the Elder Devil realm. Han Li was quite surprised by this series of changes, but everyone else displayed no reaction, clearly already accustomed to all of this. Around half a month later, Han Li's group found themselves surrounded by a nest of green foot-long scorpions atop a massive sand dune. The scorpions were emitting sharp hissing sounds, and streaks of dark green poisonous light were shooting out of their pincers toward Han and the others from all sides. However, Han Li and the other body integration stage beings merely sat back and watched as Bai Yunxin and the spatial tempering stage beings fought the scorpions with their devilish treasures. Even though the majority of their magic power had been sealed away, these devilish lizards were still nowhere near powerful enough to pose a threat to Bai Yunxin and the others. Bursts of devilish qi surged and exploded, and countless devilish scorpions were reduced to dust before they could approach Han Li's group. Several days later, the 8-footed devilish lizard that was leading from the front suddenly stopped and let loose a low roar. The burly man who was riding atop the lizard raised a hand with furrowed brows to unleash an attack toward an empty patch of sand several hundred feet away. An earth-shattering boom rang out as the sand exploded upward, creating a giant crater with a diameter of close to 100 feet. In the next instant, a giant yellow python that was around 500 to 600 feet in length erupted out of the sand before pouncing toward the burly man. Bai Yunxin and the others were quite alarmed to see this, while the burly man's brows furrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, "I didn't think we'd encounter a golden sand python. Those juniors won't be able to handle it. Looks like I'll have to expend some magic power to take care of it myself." As soon as his voice trailed off, he flipped a hand over to produce a black bracelet, then tossed it toward the oncoming giant python. The bracelet swelled to several tens of feet in size amid a flash of light, then vanished into thin air. Immediately thereafter, the burly man pointed a finger at the giant python, and black light flashed around the python's neck, following which the giant bracelet reappeared before compressing with ruthless might. The giant python immediately let loose an anguished cry before tumbling out of the sky, then writhed violently on the sand in unbearable agony. The burly chuckled coldly upon seeing this before making a hand seal, and the giant bracelet suddenly shrank down to around the size of a human hand. A geyser of black blood erupted several tens of feet up into the air, and the giant python was decapitated, falling dead onto the sand. However, the burly man didn't stop there. He immediately opened his mouth to expel a ball of crimson devilish flames, which struck the python's corpse and quickly incinerated it into dust. The giant python's soul attempted to escape during the process, but it was also swept up and incinerated into nothingness by the devilish flames. That golden sand python looked to be at the late spatial tempering stage. "It's very impressive that you were able to kill it so quickly, Brother Bai," Han Li said with a smile as he made his way over to the burly man. "You're far too kind, Brother Han. A devilish beast of this caliber will be rather troublesome for Yunxin and the others to deal, but it naturally poses no threat to the likes of us. If I were to encounter the 3 devilish scourges of the Illusion Howl Desert, I would have to run for my life," the burly man replied with a wry smile. The 3 devilish scourges. Han Li was rather intrigued to hear this. "Have you not heard of them, fellow Taoist?" The burly man was rather taken aback. "I've heard of them, but don't know the exact details about them. They must be quite powerful for you to be so wary of them," Han Li replied as he stroked his own chin in a calm manner. Chapter 2061, Bloodtooth Rice. "It seems like to me you're simply not taking them seriously. I have to caution you that the 3 devilish scourges are extremely powerful, so don't underestimate them if you're going to cross this desert. As I'm sure you're aware, the 3 devilish scourges are the Soul Fall Winds, Earth Annihilation Sand, and Illusion Howl Devilish Wolves. These three things all present different levels of danger, and among them, the illusion howl devilish wolves are only at the spatial tempering stage, but they hunt in packs, and even the smallest packs will have 7 or 8 mature wolves. They would be quite troublesome to deal with for most beings, but they would most likely pose the least threat to you. Illusion howl devilish wolves are able to move very quickly in the desert, but not as quickly as 8-footed devilish lizards. As long as you can notice them in advance, you'll be able to shake them off with ease. Of course, if you didn't have a devilish lizard steed, it would be a different story. As for the Earth Annihilation Sand, the peril that it presents is second only to the soul fall winds in the Illusion Howl Desert. Thus, the burly man began to offer an explanation, and even though Han Li was already aware of some of this information, he still listened intently. Over half a month later, Han Li was meditating on his devilish lizard steed, but he suddenly opened his eyes and cast his gaze toward a smudge of green in the desert, which lay close to 10 kilometers away. In the next instant, the purple-haired woman's voice sounded from up ahead. Fellow Taoists, the Silver River oasis lies up ahead. Our Bai family has set up a small stronghold there, so we can go and rest there for a while before we face that devilish beast. The mine is only around half a day away from the oasis. That's great. I've gotten really sick of riding on this thing. Once we get there, I'm going to take a good rest and have a huge meal. Brother Bai, I think it's time you gave me what you promised me, Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon said with an expectant expression as he patted his own large belly. Haha, rest assured, Brother Luan Dragon. I know that you have to consume that thing to unleash the full power of your special devilish art, so I'll be handing it over to you as soon as we get to the oasis. The burly man chuckled in response. Good. After I consume that thing, my magic power will increase by at least 30%, and that'll give us a better chance of chasing away that devilish beast. That thing truly is extremely delicious. I've only had it once many years ago, but I still can't forget it to this day, Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon said with a pleased nod. Of course, even our Bai family had to expend extensive efforts to secure just a small amount of that thing, the purple-haired woman said with a smile. Han Li was rather bewildered by this conversation, but he didn't think much of it. Shortly thereafter, the group arrived at the Silver River oasis. As soon as they entered the oasis, the sandstorm abruptly stopped, as if it had been kept at bay by some kind of invisible power. The oasis was only several kilometers in size, and there were shrubs of different sizes growing all around its edge. At the center of the oasis was a dark green lake that was around 250 meters in diameter, and beside the lake was a series of gray buildings that were constructed from sand, but seemed to be very sturdy. These buildings only took up an area of several acres, but there were special energy fluctuations radiating through the area, indicating that restrictions had been set up around them. After taking a glance at the small lake, Han Li turned his attention toward that cluster of buildings. These were a series of semi-spherical buildings that were no more than 30 to 40 feet tall. The burly man jumped down from his devilish lizard and stowed it away into his spirit beast bracelet, then cast his gaze toward the buildings in the distance with furrowed brows, before suddenly letting loose a long cry akin to a dragon's roar. The sound erupted straight up into the heavens, rumbling through the sky like a dull thunderclap, but even after a long time had passed, no one emerged from the buildings. The burly man's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he made a peculiar hand signal toward everyone behind him. The 6 spatial tempering stage members of the group immediately jumped down from their devilish lizards, as well before approaching the buildings in a careful manner. While approaching the buildings, Bai Yunxin pulled out an inky black metal badge before waving it forward. A layer of black qi immediately rose up from the ground to conceal the 6 of them, following which no more sound was heard. Everyone else looked on with wary expressions, while Han Li merely calmly appraised the situation. No one noticed that there was blue light flashing through his eyes, allowing him to see everything that was happening within the black mist up ahead. Having refined his bright-sight spirit eyes for over 1,000 years, they had become incredibly powerful, and it was a simple task to see through a restriction. After around 15 minutes, the black qi suddenly dispersed, and Bai Yunxin and the others reappeared. Bai Yunxin extended a curtsy toward the burly man from afar and said, "Senior, the restrictions of the fortress are completely unharmed, but all of the disciples here have disappeared." The burly man's expression darkened upon hearing this. "There's only this oasis in this nearby area. Where could they have gone?" "I'm not sure. I was unable to find any signs of battle anywhere within the stronghold either, Bai Yunxin replied in a slightly fearful manner. The burly man's expression darkened even further, and he was just about to say something else when Han Li suddenly interjected with a smile. How about we go in first, fellow Taoist Bai? This is not the right place to be discussing anything. The burly man faltered slightly upon hearing this before a thought suddenly occurred to him, and his expression eased slightly as he said, "That's true, please forgive my oversight. Let's go in, fellow Taoists." "I'll be going on ahead then." Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon chuckled as he vanished from atop his devilish lizard steed, then suddenly reappeared behind Bai Yunxin and the others before making his way toward the largest of the buildings. The burly was quite amused by this, and everyone else also jumped down from their steeds before walking toward the cluster of buildings. Moments later, all of the body integration stage beings in the group were gathered in a hall that was over 100 feet in area, while Bai Yunxin and the others were ordered to stand guard outside. I've already swept my spiritual sense through this place, and it's just as Zinner said. There are no signs of battle, and the restrictions are completely undamaged, so the disciples clearly left this place of their own accord, the purple-haired woman said with furrowed brows as she sat down onto a futon. We instructed those disciples to survey that devilish beast in shifts. Could it be that they were all eaten by that thing? That doesn't make sense, either. Even if that devilish beast had gone on a rampage, someone should have been left behind to guard this place, the burly man said with a perplexed expression. Just forget about it. It's just a group of low-grade disciples anyway. Hurry up and give me that thing so I can have a good meal first, Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon urged in an impatient manner. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Luan Dragon, we made a promise to you and we're certainly not going to revoke it. Sister, bring out that thing for brother Luan Dragon, the burly man said with a smile. The purple-haired woman smiled as she flicked her wrist, upon which a burst of white light emerged out of her storage bracelet before releasing a translucent jade box onto the table before her. Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon was ecstatic to see this, and he immediately made a grabbing motion toward the table, upon which the jade box was drawn into his grasp. The lid was quickly removed, and Han Li and Han Kizzy naturally turned to see what it was, upon which both of them displayed slightly surprised reactions. Within the jade box was a grain of rice, but it was around half a foot in length and as thick as an infant's arm. One of its two ends was very sharp, and it was entirely crimson in color. On top of that, it was giving off a mouth-watering aroma. "That's a bloodtooth rice," Han Li murmured to himself in a stunned voice. "You must be quite knowledgeable to recognize something like this, Brother Han. Indeed, this is a rare 1,000-year-old bloodtooth rice. Consuming this rice will enhance both one's blood essence and physical body, and for fellow Taoist Luan Dragon, who's cultivating a blood-related devilish art, it can stimulate the latent potential of his blood essence as well. This is one of the things we promised fellow Taoist Luan Dragon as a reward for his efforts, and it's a delectable delicacy with a rich flavor that will linger in one's mouth for as long as several months following consumption. I've only ever heard of this thing but never seen it before. Not only are the conditions required to grow this bloodtooth rice extremely rigorous, it can only come into fruition after being watered by the blood essence of a type of special beast. Even bloodtooth rice of the lowest quality will require over 100 years to grow. It's truly impressive that you were able to obtain a 1,000-year-old one, Brother Bai, Han Li said with a slightly complex expression. This bloodtooth rice was a specialty local product in the Elder Devil realm that was exceedingly rare, and it was something that Han Li was also searching for, as it was one of the few types of things that he knew of that could still enhance his body. Chapter 2062, Blood Essence Pendant. Han Li had only unintentionally stumbled upon information surrounding bloodtooth rice, while going through countless ancient tomes written about the Elder Devil realm prior to entering this realm. According to the book that he had read, bloodtooth rice could only be found at a place called the Blue Waterfall Lake, which was extremely far away from Illusion Night City. Due to its scarcity, none of the local devilish beings would sell this rice and kept it solely to themselves, so it was quite remarkable that the Bai family had managed to secure one of such a high caliber. Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon glanced at Han Li and Han Kizzy and said, "Are you too interested in this bloodtooth rice as well? It's a pity for you that I've already claimed it. If you too want one as well, then you'll have to ask Brother Bai." After that, he immediately took a bite out of the bloodtooth rice, devouring a third of it in just a single mouthful, then began to slowly chew it in a blissful manner. A rich fragrant aroma instantly filled the entire hall. "Do you have more of this bloodtooth rice, Brother Bai?" Han Li asked. Han Kizi also immediately turned his attention toward the burly man and purple-haired woman. "Surely you jest, fellow Taoist Luan dragon. Our Bai family only has this one bloodtooth rice in our possession," the burly man said with a wry smile. "I'm afraid I find that very difficult to believe, Brother Bai. Everyone knows that the more bloodtooth rice is consumed, the more pronounced the enhancement effect it would have on the consumer's body. If you're able to obtain this rice, then how would you have only obtained one?" Han Li asked as his eyes narrowed slightly. Han Kizi was clearly also unconvinced. Truth be told, our Bai family did manage to purchase several pieces of this bloodtooth rice, but they've all been consumed by my sister and myself. We only kept this one as a seed or as a pill refinement ingredient. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have this one left, the burly man hurriedly explained. Han Li was silent for a moment before continuing. "Seeing as your Bai family was able to obtain this bloodtooth rice once, I'm sure you'll be able to do it again. If you can purchase some for me, then price won't be an issue. If you can purchase a bloodtooth rice of this caliber for me, I'll be willing to assist your Bai family one more time if you encounter any trouble in the future." Han Kizi finally spoke for the very first time, and his voice was very raspy and dry, as if he really hadn't spoken in a very long time. The purple-haired woman seemed to be rather tempted by these propositions, but the burly man replied without any hesitation. "We only managed to purchase these pieces of bloodtooth rice by chance when we encountered some fellow Taoists from the Blue Waterfall Lake. Our Bai family doesn't have a consistent avenue through which we can obtain these things, so there's no need to discuss this matter any further." Han Li and Han Kizi exchanged a glance upon hearing this, but they didn't press the issue any further in the face of the burly man's stoic response. Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon was still munching on his bloodtooth rice, but a hint of disappointment also flashed through his eyes. After that, everyone began to rest and meditate in the hall. Around 2 hours after Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon finished consuming that piece of bloodtooth rice, his aura suddenly swelled drastically, and his face became bright red. Only after a long while did he manage to digest the power of the bloodtooth rice, and Han Li became even more interested in bloodtooth rice upon seeing this. It seemed that this bloodtooth rice was far more efficacious than the records on the book suggested. During this period of time, the burly man and purple-haired woman were discussing the disappearance of the Bai family's disciples through voice transmission, but they were unable to arrive at any reasonable conclusions due to the complete lack of leads. As such, they could only set the matter aside and began to meditate as well. After all, they had only left some low-grade disciples here, and overall, they were inconsequential to the Bai family. The group stayed in the stronghold for a day and a night, then continued onward on their 8-footed devilish lizard steeds after recovering to their prime conditions. Less than half a day later, the burly man looked up at the dim sky, then suddenly turned to Han Li and the others and said, "Fellow Taoists, that devilish beast is truly quite formidable, so we'll have to exercise caution from here onward. Please conceal your auras and stow away your devilish lizards." Everyone knew that this was a crucial juncture, so there were naturally no objections raised. All of them jumped down from their devilish lizard steeds before stowing them away in their spirit beast bracelets, then continued onward, flying at a low altitude. Even though no movement techniques could be used in the desert, flying at a low altitude was possible. However, doing so expended several times more magic power than it normally would. Thankfully, the mine wasn't far away, and after flying for around 2 hours, a massive sand dune suddenly appeared on the horizon. The sand dune was tens of thousands of feet tall and resembled a massive mountain. At the same time, ghostly howls and unsettling cries could be heard coming from within the sand dune. At this moment, the burly man raised an arm and indicated for everyone to proceed with caution, then suddenly descended toward an area that was several kilometers away from the sand dune. Everyone else followed along behind him, and Han Li also trailed along with blue light flashing through his eyes as he appraised a patch of ground over 100 feet away from them with a contemplative expression. All of a sudden, the burly man reached into his own sleeve, then made a grabbing motion toward the spot that Han Li was scrutinizing. A dull thump rang out, and a huge pile of sand that was as large as a room rose up from the ground before being dropped elsewhere. The burly man repeated this process a few times to dig out a hole that was over 100 feet deep, at the bottom of which was an azure copper gate. "What's this?" Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon asked with a surprised expression. The main entrance to the mine is situated at the top of the sand dune, but that's already been taken over by that devilish beast. As a safety precaution, we have to enter through another entrance. My sister and I are the only ones aware of the existence of this entrance, and not only did we set it up in an extremely discreet place, we placed no restrictions around it, so the devilish beast shouldn't have discovered it yet. If we enter through here, perhaps we'd be able to catch it off guard, the purple-haired woman explained with a smile. I see. Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon nodded in response as the puzzlement in his eyes faded. Meanwhile, the burly man pointed a finger at the copper gate from afar to release an enormous burst of invisible power. The gate tremored slightly before it was slowly pushed open, revealing an inky black passageway. The burly swept his spiritual sense toward the passageway, upon which a hint of elation appeared on his face, and he immediately drifted toward it. Let's go, that devilish beast is still yet to discover this entrance. Everyone else naturally followed him into the passageway, and as Han Li did so as well, blue light flashed through his eyes, making the dark passageway as clear as day for him. To his left and right were faint azure stone walls that completely kept out the sand of the desert, and what was even more remarkable was that these stone walls were completely smooth and seamless, and released no energy fluctuations at all, clearly indicating that there really were no restrictions set up in here. After walking along this passageway for around an hour, light suddenly appeared up ahead, and a crimson mountain face stood in their way. On this occasion, the burly man flipped a hand over to produce an antiquated rhomboid mirror before pointing it at a few times in succession. Black chi swirled over the surface of the mirror, following which a burst of five-colored light emerged. The burly man peered intently into the five-colored light for a short while, upon which his expression eased slightly, and he stowed the mirror away before sweeping a sleeve toward the mountain face up ahead. A burst of black light immediately swept forth before vanishing into the mountain face in a flash, and in the next instant, the mountain face tremored before moving to the side on its own in an entirely soundless manner. As soon as the mountain face was moved off to the side, everyone was struck by a scorching heat wave as a fiery red underground world appeared up ahead. Crimson rocks were littered all over the reddish-black ground, and there were countless reddish-purple stone stalagmites that protruded out of the ground. The burly man briefly inspected his surroundings before turning to everyone behind him with a serious expression. Let's go. The devilish beast must be lurking where the true fire chi is most abundant in this mine. Generally speaking, devilish beasts will cultivate and absorb energy while hibernating, but that may not be the case for a devilish beast comparable to a devilish lord in power. On top of that, we still don't know what kind of devilish beast it is at this point, so it's impossible for us to speculate about its habits. Please be careful, everyone. Our objective is only to wound the devilish beast and chase it away, but if we manage to kill it, then we'll split the materials from the devilish beast's body evenly. When did you become such a worrywart, Brother Bai? You've said this many times already. It would naturally be fantastic for us to kill a devilish lord-level devilish beast, but if we're unable to do so, then we won't force things either, Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon said with a smile. Right at this moment, the purple-haired woman suddenly opened her mouth to expel a white jade pendant that had a crimson pattern on its surface. She then turned to everyone else with a smile and said, "Even though I was no match for that devilish beast the last time we fought, I was able to catch it off guard and secure a drop of its blood essence. I've refined the blood essence into this jade pendant, so it'll be a simple matter for us to track it down." Chapter 2063, Remains and Lava Lake. After that, she injected her magic power into the jade pendant, and the crimson pattern suddenly began to move as if it had sprung to life. That's fantastic. With this jade pendant telling us the devilish beast's location, we won't have to worry about any surprise attacks, so the initiative will completely be on our side, the burly man said in an elated manner. Thus, he switched positions with his sister, allowing her to lead the way in his stead. The group continued onward and soon made their way into a mine tunnel. Judging from the small pits that lined the entire tunnel, the firecloud stones nearby had clearly all been already mined. Even so, the scorching temperature in here was noticeably higher than when they had first arrived underground. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D630, letter 1D45A. If it weren't for the fact that this mine was situated in the Illusion Howl Desert, everyone would have already unleashed earth movement techniques to seek out that devilish beast. But as things currently were, they could only progress deeper and deeper into the mine through the tunnels. There were countless tunnels in this mine, with crossroads set up at regular intervals, creating a cobweb-like system. These tunnels ranged from just over 100 feet to around half a kilometer in length, and most of them had already been completely mined, with only some of the more obscure tunnels still harboring firecloud stones that were yet to be excavated. However, after passing through around a dozen tunnels and arriving at a crossroads leading into 4 or 5 different tunnels, Han Li's eyes suddenly narrowed slightly. All of these tunnels were shimmering with specks of crimson light, and the walls were riddled with fist-sized crimson crystals. However, Han Li wasn't looking at all of these precious materials. Instead, he was looking at a set of headless remains that lay slumped at the entrance of one of the tunnels. Even though the body was complete aside from its missing head, its skin was completely shriveled up, as if its blood and flesh had somehow been completely stripped away, leaving only a pouch of skin behind. The purple-haired woman and the burly man had naturally also seen the set of remains, and a hint of surprise flashed through their eyes. The purple-haired woman glanced at the robes being worn by the set of remains, and her expression immediately darkened as she made a grabbing motion toward the headless body. A small scrap of cloth detached itself from the robe before being drawn into her grasp. Han Li took a glance at it to find that a faint silver Bai character was emblazoned on that scrap of cloth. "This is a disciple of our Bai family, but it's hard to tell which one it is," the purple-haired woman said with furrowed brows. The burly man harumphed coldly before also making a grabbing motion toward the headless body, and an azure leather pouch was drawn toward him before exploding at his behest, releasing a swarm of huge crimson wasps. Each of these wasps was as large as an adult human hand, and they were buzzing incessantly. "These are blood-sifting wasps. If I recall correctly, Bai Yan possesses a swarm of these devilish insects, right?" the burly man asked with a dark expression. One of the spatial tempering stage disciples of the Bai family stepped forward and confirmed, "Indeed, Senior, these are none other than Bai Yan's blood-sifting wasps. I've seen him use these wasps in battle on multiple occasions." This was an elderly man with snowy white hair, and there was a hint of sorrow in his eyes, suggesting that he seemed to have shared some type of bond with this Bai Yan. The purple-haired woman sighed as she raised a hand to release a fireball that incinerated the body into ashes, then murmured to herself, "In that case, these must be Bai Yan's remains. He's the most powerful one among the disciples that we left at the Oasis stronghold. How did he end up here?" In reality, no one was all that surprised by the gruesome sight of the shriveled, headless corpse. After all, there were countless beings in the Elder Devil realm who cultivated by devouring the blood essence of others, so this wasn't exactly an uncommon occurrence. "Let's keep going. Perhaps we'll find some leads up ahead," the burly man suggested after a brief pause for contemplation. No one offered any objections, and they continued into the tunnel where the remains had just been found. However, everyone was proceeding with more caution, and after making their way along the tunnel for several thousand feet, they encountered 5 or 6 more headless corpses, all of whom were confirmed to be by family disciples who had been left at the stronghold. The burly man's expression darkened further and further with each headless body that was discovered, and after walking for a while longer, he suddenly turned to the purple-haired woman and asked, "How far away are we from that devilish beast? It won't be able to detect us, will it?" "Rest assured, big brother. Spiritual sense is greatly inhibited in the Illusion Howl Desert in the first place, and that's only further exacerbated by the disruptive effect of the true fire chi in this mine. We're currently still around 3 kilometers away from the devilish beast, so there's no way that it'll be able to detect us. However, I'm not sure if that will continue to be the case if we get any closer than this," the purple-haired woman replied after briefly glancing down at the jade pendant in her hand. After a brief pause for contemplation, the burly man decided, "In that case, let's all unleash our concealment techniques right away." "Do we really have to start right away? Using concealment techniques in this desert is going to be very taxing on our magic power. So be it, better safe than sorry, I guess." Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon mumbled reluctantly before opening his mouth to expel a black badge, which transformed into a cloud of black mist that enshrouded his entire body. Immediately thereafter, both the mist and Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon himself gradually faded into nothingness. Han Li also followed suit as he made a hand seal, upon which black light swirled over his body, and he transformed into a barely visible black shadow. As for Han Kizzy, he abruptly swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of glacial light, upon which his entire body became as translucent as an ice statue. Bai Yunxin and the others each summoned a silver flag before tossing them up into the air in unison to create a silver light formation. The formation descended upon all 6 of them, and they instantly disappeared as well. Seeing as everyone had already concealed themselves, the burly man and the purple-haired woman also did the same as one of them released a burst of black chi from their body, while the other summoned a handkerchief-like treasure. Thus the group continued onward, and much to their surprise, this tunnel was far longer than they had anticipated. Even after walking for a long while, they still hadn't made it to the other side. As they progressed, the straight tunnel suddenly began to wind and twist, and the stone walls around them also became very coarse and rugged. They had entered a natural underground fissure. Other rifts of different sizes had also begun to appear around them, ranging from only around a foot in width to several tens of feet wide. Scorching winds would occasionally blow through those rifts, carrying a charred, sulfurous scent. Around an hour later, after everyone had flown out of a nondescript-looking rift, a giant underground lava lake suddenly appeared down below. The lake was over 1,000 acres in area, and it was filled with bubbling red lava. The edge of the lake was surrounded by charred rocky ground, but there were a series of reddish-purple crystals embedded into those rocks, and they were shimmering with a peculiar red light under the lava's illumination. And Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this. These reddish-purple crystals were manifestations of fire attribute chi that had been compressed to the extreme. Even though they were quite small, all of them were extremely rare top-grade fire cloud stones. At just a rough glance, he discovered that there were tens of thousands of these crystals, and they would be worth an astronomical number of devil stones or spirit stone. It was no wonder that the Bai family was willing to pay such a heavy price to try and salvage this mine. However, what was rather befuddling to Han Li was that there was no devilish beast to be seen here. The underground lava lake was indeed extremely massive, but its structure was very simple, and there weren't any obvious hiding places. The burly man also seemed to be a little perplexed, as he transmitted his voice toward the purple-haired woman. "Is this the right place, sister? Is that devilish beast really here?" "There's no mistaking it. Its blood essence is definitely pointing toward this place," the purple-haired woman replied without any hesitation. "In that case, it's most likely hiding within the lava down below. It seems that it really hasn't detected our arrival yet. Yunxin, set up the formation right away. Fellow Taoists will be requiring your services soon as well," the burly man said as he turned to everyone else. The 6 Bai family disciples immediately gave affirmative responses before scattering around the lava lake, then summoned stacks of formation flags and formation plates to begin setting up a giant formation. As for Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon and Han Kizi, they also descended toward the lava down below, then stopped and hovered in midair over 100 feet above the surface of the lava lake. Even though the 2 of them were still concealed by their respective secret techniques, they still summoned protective devilish treasures in a cautious manner. Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon opened his mouth to produce a shimmering blue bowl that was emanating blue glacial light, while Han Qizai swept a sleeve through the air to produce 12 translucent flags, which transformed into 12 balls of glacial light that revolved around his body. Meanwhile, Han Li gently stomped a foot down onto the air below, and 5-colored light erupted underfoot, forming a 5-colored lotus flower that carried his body downward on a slow descent. The 5-colored lotus flower was extremely vibrant and was releasing wisps of glacial chi. It had been manifested by none other than these 5-colored glacial flames. Chapter 2064, Devilish Beast. Han Li, Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon, and Han Kizi were hovering above the lava lake in a triangular formation while releasing their spiritual sense downward. However, there were layers of peculiar energy fluctuations within the lava that prevented Han Li's spiritual sense from reaching any deeper than just over 1,000 feet into the lake. For Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon and the others, their spiritual sense was far less powerful than Han Li's, so that distance was shortened to around 0 to 400 feet for them. A distance of just over 1,000 feet only allowed Han Li to discover that there was a massive black shadow lying at the bottom of the lake. However, due to the energy fluctuations in the lava, he was unable to see the shadow clearly, so he couldn't determine whether this was their target for this trip. Even though the black shadow laid completely still as if it were dead, Han Li was still surveying it with great caution. As Bai Yunxin and the others were setting up the formation, The two devilish lords of the Bai family were also in action. The burly man had summoned his antiquated mirror again, and it transformed into over 100 mirror fragments that spread all over the air above the lava lake, shining black devilish light down upon it. The burly man's lips tremored silently, and he wore a slightly strained expression, clearly finding it rather difficult to unleash his abilities while the majority of his magic power was being restricted. Meanwhile, the purple-haired woman made a hand seal, and a suit of devilish armor that was as pristine white as jade appeared over her body. At the same time, she made a grabbing motion with her other hand, and a long, inky black halberd appeared in her grasp. She swept the weapon through the air, and an inky black giant horned tiger projection appeared, snarling viciously as if it were about to pounce at any moment. Around 15 minutes later, the 6 spatial tempering stage by family disciples finished setting up the formation, and balls of black chi immediately surfaced around the lava lake. Bursts of killing intent and flashes of cold light were contained within the balls of black chi, as if they were holding countless sharp blades. The 6 spatial tempering stage by family disciples had concealed themselves within these balls of black chi and were controlling the entire formation. The burly man then transmitted his voice toward Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon. "The formation is ready, fellow Taoist Luin Dragon. Please force the beast out of the lava now." A cold look appeared in Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon's eyes upon hearing this, and he immediately let loose a loud cry before pointing a finger toward the blue bowl he had summoned. The bowl shuddered before expanding drastically in size, transforming into a blue moon, and at the same time, it released a thick pillar of blue light that shot forth toward the lava down below with ferocious might. The pillar of light stirred up the lava lake like a giant rod, and in the blink of an eye, massive waves had been swept up over the surface of the entire lake. In the next instant, a thunderous roar of fury rang out, and the lava parted as a burst of green chi emerged, forcing the pillar of blue light out of the lake. A cold smile appeared on Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon's face upon seeing this, and an astonishing aura erupted from his body. At the same time, he flicked his fingers toward the blue bowl to release around a dozen streaks of black light, all of which vanished into the bowl in a flash. A loud ringing sound suddenly erupted out of the blue moon, and countless white runes appeared over its surface. As a result, the blue pillar of light it was releasing became around twice as thick as it had been before, and it crashed down from above with renewed might. The burst of opposing green chi was completely caught off guard and was instantly destroyed, following which the pillar of blue light plunged deep into the lava lake again. A resounding boom rang out within the lake, and it seemed that the attack really had struck the devilish beast that was hiding within the lake. "How did you like that?" Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon chortled as he prepared to unleash more attacks with his blue bowl. However, right at this moment, the entire cave suddenly began to tremor violently, and a crimson wave of light swept up over the surface of the lava, surging directly toward Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon, and even Han Li and Han Kizzy were caught up within the scope of the attack. Han Li's expression remained unchanged as the 5-colored lotus beneath his feet rotated slightly, and a 5-colored glacial light barrier appeared around him, easily keeping the crimson light at bay. Han Kizzy also remained on the spot as the 12 balls of glacial light around him swelled drastically to form a barrier of glacial light as well. In contrast, Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon suddenly let loose a cry of alarm as his body was instantly flung back by a burst of enormous invisible power, and he crashed violently into a massive stone wall, sinking several feet into it as countless rock fragments rained down from above. At the spot where Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon had been standing before, a massive beastly claw that was covered in green flames had appeared, and that appeared to have been what had sent Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon flying. After being smashed into the stone wall, most of Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon's clothes had been torn away, but a suit of inky black armor had appeared over his body to nullify most of the impact. As such, even though he was looking quite disheveled, the injuries that he had sustained were actually quite minor. Even so, his face instantly turned as red as blood, and a burst of power erupted from his body, shattering the stone wall around him, thereby allowing him to free himself. Immediately thereafter, he cussed in a furious manner as he made a grabbing motion, and a strange long-handled blade appeared in his grasp amid a flash of yellow light. Immediately thereafter, the black swirling around his body swelled drastically, and he slashed the blade toward the giant claw like lightning with both hands. A yellow blade projection swept forth, covering a distance of several hundred feet in a flash before viciously slicing toward the beastly claw. However, despite its massive size, the beastly claw was unexpectedly agile and instantly vanished into thin air. Thus, the yellow blade projection struck nothing but empty space. Immediately thereafter, violent waves surged over the surface of the lava lake down below, and a gigantic creature that was enshrouded in green devilish flames emerged. The creature was over 200 feet in size, and its roar resembled the moo of a cow. Han Li and Han Kizi immediately shot back, and one of them rubbed his hands together before raising them to release countless threads of gray light, while 2 of 12 balls of glacial light around the other's body hurtled directly toward the giant beast. As soon as these balls of glacial light were hurled through the air, white icy halos appeared around them as a show of their fearsome glacial might. However, the giant devilish beast remained completely unfazed. It abruptly raised its head, and the green flames around its body instantly transformed into layers of green light barriers. Regardless of whether it was Han Li's gray threads of light or those icy halos, they were both instantly destroyed as if they had encountered the bane of their existence. Han Li's heart jolted slightly upon seeing this. His divine essence-effused light was able to repress 5 elemental power, so it was quite a surprise to him that these green devilish flames were able to nullify them so easily. However, the 2 balls of glacial light unleashed by Han Kizi seemed to possess some type of peculiar power, allowing them to tear through the green flames and hurtle directly toward the devilish beast. The devilish beast immediately expelled 2 bursts of black chi out of its mouth in response, and after the 2 opposing powers clashed, the balls of glacial light reverted back into a pair of translucent flags that descended from above. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Kizi's eyes upon seeing this, but he immediately made a grabbing motion, drawing the 2 flags back to him as streaks of white light, which vanished into his body in a flash. Right at this moment, the devilish beast let loose a loud roar, and the temperature within the entire cave instantly increased by severalfold. Crimson fireballs emerged around its body, yet just as it was about to unleash an attack, the burly man and purple-haired woman sprang into action. The burly man began to chant something while pointing a finger at all of the mirror fragments in the air, and they released bolts of black lightning in unison, intertwining to form a black lightning net that descended from above. Meanwhile, the purple-haired woman stabbed her black halberd viciously downward, and the giant black tiger projection around it let loose a thunderous roar before swooping down as a streak of black light. The space in the wake of the black light twisted and warped, and it appeared directly above the devilish beast in a flash, completely undeterred by the oncoming balls of green flames. However, the green flames around the body of the devilish beast suddenly swelled drastically, then formed a 2-headed devilish python projection that clashed with the tiger projection. Both of these projections were formed by devilish chi, but it was as if a clash were taking place between an actual pair of ferocious devilish beasts. As for that black lightning net, all of the crimson fireballs in the air immediately shot forth toward it at the devilish beast's behest, and the lightning net was completely kept at bay amid countless explosions of red light. This devilish beast truly did possess powers comparable to a late-stage devilish lord. It was opposing several devilish lords at once, yet managed to hold its own. However, during this brief delay, Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon also appeared in a flash above the devilish beast, then suddenly patted his own belly with a cold look in his eyes. A treasure emerged from his stomach, revealing itself to be a small drum that was only several inches in size. The drum was entirely crimson in color and had countless snowflake-like runes engraved all over its surface. Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon gently patted the drum, and glacial winds were instantly swept up as countless bright red snowflakes appeared before descending from the heavens. Chapter 2065, Fierce Mind Battle 1. The snowflakes didn't appear to be very large, but they were able to instantly nullify all of the crimson fireballs they came into contact with, and a burst of glacial chi filled the entire air, eradicating the scorching heat. At the same time, Han Li flicked his fingers toward the devilish beast in quick succession, releasing 10 streaks of azure sword chi that shot forth toward the devilish beast in a flash. Meanwhile, Han Kizi harumphed coldly as made a grabbing motion with a pristine white hand, and a translucent ice mountain instantly appeared. Initially, the mountain was only around 10 feet in size, but it quickly swelled to several hundred feet at his behest, then crashed down toward the devilish beast. In that instant, Han Li's trio had unleashed their attacks toward the devilish beast all at the same time. However, as opposed to testing out the devilish beast's powers as they had done during their initial attacks, all 3 of them were using their true powers now. The devilish beast seemed to also be aware that it was in a perilous situation, and it let loose a low roar as the green flames around its body surged upward, but at the same time, it descended toward the lava lake for refuge. However, right at this moment, Xianxia and the others activated the giant formation they had set up. A string of loud clangs rang out from within the black chi they were hiding in, following which countless snowy white saber projections shot forth in all directions, creating an impenetrable net above the lava lake that stood in the devilish beast's way. All of these saber projections were shimmering with a cold light, and were clearly extremely sharp and formidable. The devilish beast was very confident in the power of its own body, but it still didn't dare to plunge into this fearsome net, and was forced to stop in midair. At this point, the snowflakes, ice mountain, and sword chi had already swept the green flames aside, and were crashing down toward the devilish beast from above. Even in this perilous situation, the devilish beast didn't panic in the slightest. Instead, it seemed to have been fueled by its vicious instincts as it opened its mouth to devour all of the green flames around its own body. As a result, it was revealed to be a ferocious monster with the head of a deer, the body of a cow, and the paws of a lion. After the green flames were devoured, it threw its head back and expelled a green stone brick out of its mouth, which swelled drastically to form a massive fiery stone wall. In the next instant, the snowflakes, sword chi, and ice mountain struck the stone wall, amid a string of resounding explosions and flashes of dazzling light, but the stone wall remained completely unmoved. The devilish lords present were all quite surprised to see this, and Han Li was also rather taken aback. The sword chi that he had unleashed appeared to be quite mundane, but they were no less powerful than the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords themselves. As such, they were capable of slicing through even some lower-grade treasures. He hadn't expected the streaks of sword chi to kill the devilish beast, but it was still quite a surprise to him that the stone wall had been able to keep them at bay so easily. Right at this moment, a layer of black chi appeared over the purple-haired woman's face, and she hurled halberd violently downward with a flick of her wrist. The black halberd instantly swelled to several times its original size, transforming into a streak of black light that was over 100 feet in length before plunging viciously into the stone wall. An earth-shattering boom immediately rang out, and the entire space tremored violently. Immediately thereafter, a black sun emerged in the air, and countless cracks appeared over the surface of the seemingly indestructible stone wall, looking as if it were going to shatter at any moment. The purple-haired woman was ecstatic to see this, but the devilish beast suddenly opened its mouth to release a burst of azure light that surged into the stone wall in a flash. The azure flames around the stone wall instantly reared up, and the cracks that had been inflicted were quickly sealed again. The purple-haired woman's expression darkened upon seeing this, and her black halberd instantly transformed into countless massive halberd projections that came crashing down toward the stone wall like a torrential storm. At the same time, the burly man switched a different hand seal, and the mirror fragments in the air unleashed over 100 bolts of black lightning again. On this occasion, they intertwined to form a black lightning sword that was over 100 feet in length, and it swept down with vicious force. Bolts of black lightning came crashing down like countless black snakes, striking the stone wall and dispersing most of the green flames around it. Hankizi also pointed a finger toward the ice mountain that he had summoned, and it tremored before vanishing on the spot. After that, spatial fluctuations erupted behind the devilish beast, and the ice mountain reappeared out of thin air before hurtling toward the devilish beast's back. Before the ice mountain had even struck its target, a burst of enormous invisible power and translucent glacial light swept forth, but right in that instant, the devilish beast suddenly raised one of its paws before thrusting it forward. All of a sudden, the paw vanished into thin air, following which a giant claw that was enshrouded in green flames peered behind the devilish beast before crashing into the oncoming ice mountain. The glacial light and green devilish flames exploded in unison amid a dull thump, and the ice mountain was sent flying backward while the beastly paw vanished again. Hankizi's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he pointed his finger toward the ice mountain several times in succession to arrest its momentum, then sent it hurtling toward the devilish beast again. At the same time, a faint buzzing sound rang out from the small crimson drum being controlled by Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon, and all of the crimson snowflakes drifting through the air transformed into countless ice spikes that rained down toward devilish beast in a torrential downpour. The ice spikes struck the stone wall before exploding into balls of crimson light, and a repugnant odor wafted through the air. In the next instant, a series of pits and craters began to appear on the surface of the wall, indicating that the ice spikes seemed to have been imbued with lethal poison. In the face of so many attacks, the stone wall was beginning to struggle. The devilish beast expelled several bursts of azure light out of its mouth, but was still unable to repair the cracks on the stone wall as quickly as they were being inflicted. The devilish beast immediately let loose a low roar upon seeing this, and countless devilish patterns appeared over the surface of its body before swirling incessantly. Identical green devilish patterns appeared on the giant stone wall as well, and it abruptly descended the devilish beast, then transformed into a massive stone ball around its body. All of the oncoming attacks struck the giant stone ball in a frenzy. The streaks of azure sword chi summoned by Han Li had transformed into over 100 powerful sword threads that plunged viciously into the stone ball, inflicting many tiny holes onto its surface, but were unable to fully penetrate. Even so, it was quite clear that the stone ball wouldn't be able to last too long in the face of such ferocious attacks. The green flames around it were gradually dimming, and countless rock fragments were falling from its surface. The burly man and purple-haired woman were both ecstatic to see this, and they injected even more power into their attacks. On top of that, the giant net of blades that had sealed off the surface of the lac had disassembled itself into countless sharp blades at the behest of the 6 by-family disciples, and these blades were also joining in on the attack. Within the span of just a few breaths, the stone ball had been whittled down significantly, and it seemed that victory would be secured soon. However, Han Li's brows were slightly furrowed, as things seemed to be progressing far too smoothly. Thus far, the devilish beast hadn't truly displayed its fearsome late-body integration stage power. As soon as this thought occurred to Han Li, the devilish beast let loose a loud roar from within the stone ball, and pillars of scorching hot lava suddenly rose up from the placid surface of the lava lake, converging to form a massive ball of lava that enveloped the stone ball. Immediately thereafter, countless green devilish patterns appeared on the surface of the ball of lava, following which it transformed into a molten giant that was over 100 feet tall. The giant had crimson flames surging all over its body and green light flashing within its eyes. It raised its arms high up into the air, and waves of fire swept forth from its body in all directions. There seemed to be an endless supply of crimson flames within the giant's body, and a crimson sea of flames had filled the entire space in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, the giant opened its mouth to expel a vast expanse of green devilish flames, which fused into the crimson flames, forming a dozen or so green fiery pythons that each exceeded 100 feet in length, all of which pounced toward the enemy devilish lords. Red light flashed before Han Li's eyes, and his entire body was plunged into the sea of flames. Scorching devilish chi revolved around him like a frenzied vortex, and he was bound to the spot by some type of profound power hidden within the sea of flames. Under the compression of this profound power, the azure streaks of sword chi within the sea of flame had also become very slow and sluggish. The attacks unleashed by the other devilish lords were also significantly nullified by the sea of flames, rendering them unable to pose much of a threat to the devilish beast. Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he made a grabbing motion toward the streaks of azure sword chi, and all of them exploded within the sea of flames, forming balls of azure light that forcibly dispersed some of the crimson flames, only to be immediately overwhelmed by the sea of fire again. After that, Han Li made a hand seal, and the 5-colored glacial flames around him expanded to force back the surrounding flames. Yet just as he was about to escape from the sea of fire, a blood-curdling cry suddenly rang out from within the formation around the lava lake. Chapter 2066, Fierce Mind Battle 2. The burly man's heart jolted upon hearing this, and he hurriedly swept his spiritual sense toward the black chi down below. That cry had come from one of the Bai family disciples, and under normal circumstances, he would be able to instantly glean the situation within the formation, but his powers were currently severely restricted, and the power of the formation was obstructing him as well, so he was unable to see what was happening within the black chi. However, he could sense that one of the auras of the 6 disciples had already disappeared. This was naturally very alarming to him, yet before he could do anything, 2 more blood-curdling cries rang out in succession within the black chi. Immediately thereafter, the auras of 2 more Bai family disciples were snuffed out. "Save me, Senior!" A Bai family disciple rushed out of the black chi before frantically fleeing toward Heavenly Lord Luan Dragon, who was the devilish lord that was situated closest to him. However, in this sea of flames, the disciple's speed was greatly hampered, and Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon remained on the spot, displaying no intention to help him. The Bai family disciple was plunged into complete despair upon seeing this, yet before he could do anything, a streak of black light suddenly shot forth out of the black chi, striking the disciple in a flash, completely unimpeded by the sea of fire. A howl of anguish rang out as the protective devilish chi around the disciple's body was scattered, and his head rolled down from his body. Another murky white head then emerged out of the wound on his neck, and it cast a cold glance toward Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon with its crimson eyes. As soon as their eyes met, Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon was instantly struck by a bone-chilling sensation, as if all of the blood in his entire body had frozen solid. This was naturally quite alarming to him, and he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a bone shield that situated itself in front of him. At this moment, Bai Yunxin and another Bai family disciple flew out of the black chi with horrified expressions, and one of them flew toward Han Li, while the other flew toward Han Kizi. The head that had emerged from the neck of the decapitated Bai family disciple cast its gaze toward the pair, then suddenly flew out of the disciple's body. It shot forth as a streak of white light, then split up into two and flew toward both Bai Yunxin and the other disciple. After just a single flash, it had already reached its two targets. "Save me, Senior. Senior Han." Both of the disciples were naturally horrified to see this, and they each summoned several protective devilish treasures to try and save themselves. However, the white light was able to pass through the treasures as if it had no substantial form, and it plunged into their bodies in a flash. In the next instant, both of their heads were also decapitated amid blood-curdling cries, only to be replaced by two other white heads. The white light had moved so quickly that it had afforded Han Li and Han Kizi no opportunity to step in. Both of their expressions changed slightly upon seeing this. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D604, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D680, letter 1D560, letter 1D55E. If it weren't for the fact that they were unable to use movement techniques and restricted by this sea of flames, it would have been a simple task for them to rescue the two Bai family disciples. But in these circumstances, they could only look on as the disciples were killed. Han Li cast his gaze toward the first disciple who had been decapitated to find that his body had completely shriveled up. His blood and flesh had vanished, and his remains mirrored the headless bodies that they had discovered in the mine tunnel earlier. It seemed that the other Bai family disciples had also fallen in the same manner. However, the monsters who had attacked the Bai family disciples seemed to be aware that the devilish lords wouldn't be so easy to defeat, and they merely appraised Han Li and the others with their cold crimson eyes. This indicated that these beings had a high level of intelligence, which made the devilish lords present even more wary of them. The burly man and purple-haired woman exchanged a glance to see their own shock and fury mirrored in one another's eyes, and they shared a quick conversation through voice transmission before the burly man turned to Han Li. "Fellow Taoist Han, please face these monsters for now with my sister. I'll take care of this devilish beast with the other fellow Taoists. After we defeat that devilish beast, we'll come to assist the two of you." As soon as his voice trailed off, bright white light abruptly erupted out of the purple-haired woman's suit of armor, forcing back the surrounding crimson flames and allowing her to fly directly toward Han Li. Han Kizi also quickly flew toward Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon and the burly man upon hearing this arrangement, using the balls of glacial light around him to part the sea of flames. In the face of these powerful enemies, there was no time for debate, so he immediately decided to comply with the burly man's suggestion. Han Li had no objections either, and once the purple-haired woman was less than 200 feet away from him, he immediately transmitted his voice toward her. "Fellow Taoist Fusion, do you know what these beings are?" The woman hesitated momentarily before replying. "This is the first time I've seen these things as well, but I recall reading about a similar type of entity known as devilish spirits that seem to be quite similar to these things. However, I can't confirm if these are indeed devilish spirits." Devilish spirits? Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. The woman hadn't elaborated on what they were, but these devilish spirits were clearly supposed to be quite troublesome to deal with. "Indeed, I suspect that this thing may be a devilish spirit formed by the spiritual chi within this mine. If that's the case, then not only will its attacks be completely insubstantial and formless, it'll be immune to virtually all physical attacks, and even its movement techniques may not be hampered much here. I don't know why it's decided to join forces with this devilish beast, but we have to be careful, the purple-haired woman replied. I see. Let me find out if it really is immune to physical attacks. Han Kizi turned toward Bai Yunxin's possessed body with a cold light in his eyes, then cast his gaze toward the three other devilish lords. Those three had already begun attacking the molten giant formed by the devilish beast, and aside from his vast yin-treasured mirror, the burly man had summoned a pair of metal hooks that were revolving around the molten giant's body, inflicting a large hole upon it with each attack. Meanwhile, Heavenly Lord Luin Dragon's body had swelled to several times its original size, and he was releasing gusts of purple winds out of his mouth to force back the crimson sea of flames. As for Han Kizi, his body had become as translucent as an ice sculpture, and he was unleashing a series of extremely powerful glacial abilities. The devilish beast was indeed very formidable, but in the face of the three devilish lords, all of whom were attacking it with powers that held an advantage against it, it had been forced onto the back foot. Even though the lava enveloping its body was being heavily damaged, it was able to endlessly regenerate by drawing upon the lava in the lake, so the three devilish lords were unable to truly harm the beast. Han Li's expression remained unchanged upon seeing this, but he abruptly made a grabbing motion, and an azure longsword that was around 3 feet long appeared in his grasp. He slashed the sword toward Bai Yunxin's body, and it instantly vanished from his grasp. However, in the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted from Bai Yunxin's headless body, and a translucent azure thread appeared before drifting down like a gentle breeze, slicing the white head on her body in half right down the center. After reaching the late body integration stage, Han Li's sword thread had become incredibly powerful and unpredictable, allowing him to slice through that head with ease. An extremely disorienting shriek rang out from the two halves of the white head, following which Bai Yunxin's headless body instantly completely shriveled upon. In the next instant, the two halves of the head flew out of her body before combining as one to form a streak of white light that shot forth directly toward Han Li. With Han Li's immense spiritual sense, he was naturally completely unaffected by the soundwave attack. All of a sudden, he swept a sleeve through the air, and several tens of small azure swords shot forth, transforming into several tens of azure sword threads that flew directly toward the oncoming streak of light. The streak of light drew to an abrupt halt as several tens of faint azure marks appeared all over it, following which it was split up into several tens of pieces. However, these fragments then immediately fused back together before hurtling toward Han Li again, maintaining its original speed in the process. It really is virtually immune to physical attacks. Looks like this is indeed a devilish spirit, Han Li murmured to himself as he swept his other sleeve through the air to release a ball of silver flames, which struck the streak of white light with unerring accuracy. The silver flames then reared up to several feet tall and instantly inundated the oncoming streak of white light. While keeping an eye on the other devilish spirit, the purple-haired woman was naturally also watching what Han Li was doing, and just when she thought that the silver flames would be unable to harm the devilish spirit, she was given quite a surprise. As soon as the streak of white light was enshrouded within the silver flames, it let loose a blood-curdling shriek before frantically rolling around on the ground, seemingly in an attempt to snuff out the flames. Chapter 2067, Fierce Mind Battle 3. Within the span of just 2 breaths, the shrieking ceased, and the streak of light was incinerated into nothingness. The purple-haired woman didn't hesitate any longer upon seeing this, and immediately attacked the other devilish spirit. She hurled her halberd through the air, and a tiger's roar rang out as the halberd transformed into a giant horned tiger projection, then released a pillar of black light out of its mouth, which stuck the other devilish spirit in a flash. The body that was possessed by the devilish spirit and the white head were torn into countless pieces amid a violent explosion, immediately following which the woman rubbed her hands together before raising them toward the distance. Ball of black flames erupted forth in a frenzy before sweeping up the fragments of the devilish spirit and setting them alight. The purple-haired woman then waved a hand to draw her halberd back to herself before appraising the black flames with a faint smile on her face. It seemed that these devilish spirits weren't as troublesome to deal with as the records had suggested. However, as soon as this thought appeared in her mind, the black flames in the distance suddenly exploded, and wisps of devilish flames erupted forth in all directions, among which were interspersed countless thumb-sized specks of light. These specks of light detached themselves from the devilish flames, then converged toward the same spot to form a faint white figure. The black devilish flames she had unleashed were completely unable to harm this devilish spirit. The woman drew a sharp breath upon seeing this, and only then did she realize that the silver flames released by Han Li were no ordinary flames. Right at this moment, the devilish spirit hurtled directly toward her as a streak of white light, and within the blink of an eye, it was only several tens of feet away from her. The woman was slightly alarmed to see this, but she didn't panic in the slightest as she swept her halberd through the air to unleash countless streaks of black light that plunged down toward the white light. At the same time, she made a hand seal with her other hand to release a ball of green light, which swelled to the size of a wagon wheel in the blink of an eye, revealing itself to be a crescent-shaped blade. The oncoming streak of white light didn't take any evasive measures as it crashed headfirst into the black light and green blade. The white figure then somehow passed directly through the opposing attacks before pouncing directly toward the purple-haired woman. The purple-haired woman's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and she suddenly rose up slightly before hurling her halberd through the air while launching her other fist toward the white figure at the same time. Her fist appeared to be very delicate, but as it was thrust through the air, a patch of space that was several tens of feet in size abruptly collapsed. A gray ball of light then emerged, and all of the surrounding air surged toward it in a frenzy. Spatial power. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. The devilish spirit was situated right within the ball of light, and it began to struggle violently as its body transformed and contorted into different shapes. However, it was slowly but inevitably drawn toward the center of the ball of light by that burst of strange suction force. The purple-haired woman was ecstatic to see this, and a layer of gray light appeared over her other hand, which she thrust toward the same direction. A dull thump rang out, and the existing ball of gray light shuddered before the suction force that was emanating from it, intensified by around twofold. The devilish spirit was unable to resist any longer, and it was drawn to the center of the ball of gray light before being shredded into smithereens by a burst of power that resembled countless sharp blades. A faint smile appeared on the purple-haired woman's face as she made a hand seal, then pointed a finger toward the gray light, planning to unleash a powerful secret technique to completely destroy the trapped devilish spirit. However, right at this moment, Han Li suddenly raised an eyebrow and said, "Look out." The purple-haired woman faltered slightly upon hearing this, and before she could figure out what Han Li was referring to, several hundred threads of white light suddenly erupted out of the gray light up ahead before striking her body in a flash. Several layers of light barriers appeared around her, but the white threads passed through them as if they didn't exist before striking her suit of pristine white armor. Balls of white light erupted out of the suit of armor upon being struck by the white threads, and within those balls of white light were silver runes of different sizes that temporarily kept the white threads at bay. However, the white threads seemed to be imbued with extremely fearsome power, and the purple-haired woman was sent flying back in an uncontrollable manner. Immediately thereafter, the white threads converged to form the white figure again, and it quickly reached out toward her with both hands. A pair of massive hands of light that were around 10 feet in size each appeared out of thin air, then grabbed viciously toward her. Before they had even come into contact with her, two bursts of enormous force were already sweeping toward her body. The woman's face paled at the sight of the powerful attack, and she knew that if she were to be struck by the attack, would definitely at least be severely wounded if not killed on the spot. As such, she could only grit her teeth and fight for her life. A layer of crimson chi appeared over her face while black light flashed behind her, and a menacing devilish projection with a tiger's head and a human's body emerged. The devilish projection let loose a low roar and reached out toward the pair of massive hands of light with its devilish paws. However, the woman had still underestimated the devilish spirit's powers. In the instant that the pair of hands came into contact with the devilish paws, they suddenly twisted and flashed past the devilish paws at an incredible angle before crashing down toward the purple-haired woman's head. The purple-haired woman's face paled even further upon seeing this, but it was too late for her to do anything, and she could only inject her magic power into her suit of armor in a frenzy, preparing to withstand the attack with her body. Just as the giant hands were about to reach her, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted nearby, and two balls of silver flames shot forth in a flash to strike the pair of huge hands. A resounding boom rang out as the pair of hands was inundated by the silver flames, then instantly incinerated into nothingness. In the next instant, The two bursts of silver flames combined as one, transforming into a silver fire raven that was around 10 feet in size before flying toward the devilish spirit. Han Li had finally stepped in the woman's hour of need. The devilish spirit was clearly very fearful of the silver flames, and it instantly shot back over 100 feet in a wraith-like manner before expelling bursts of reddish-purple light out of its mouth. These bursts of light then transformed into several tens of streaks of purple sword chi that struck the silver fire raven in a flash. But Fire Raven remained completely unscathed, while the streaks of purple sword chi were all incinerated into nothingness. However, the silver fire raven was slowed down slightly by the streaks of sword chi, and the devilish spirit took advantage of this opportunity to flee back into the stone wall, where it disappeared. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he waved a hand toward the silver fire raven, upon which it immediately returned to him as a ball of silver flames, then vanished into his body in a flash. The purple-haired woman was greatly relieved as she steadied herself, then hurriedly extended a grateful salute toward Han Li from afar. "Thank you for your assistance, Brother Han. If you hadn't stepped in, I would have truly been in severe peril. I'll be sure to repay you for this." "You're welcome, fellow Taoist. I agreed to lend you my assistance, so it's only expected of me to step in when you're in danger. It's a pity we let that devilish spirit get away. It seems to possess quite a high level of intelligence, so it'll be very difficult to capture it again," Han Li replied with a smile. "You're far too modest, Brother Han. Indeed, we'll have to eradicate this devilish spirit if we want to resume normal operations in this mine, but let's take care of that devilish beast first," the purple-haired woman said with a wry smile before flying toward the other battle. There, the molten giant was releasing boundless crimson flames, and even though it was clearly on the back foot, it was still attacking the devilish lords with immense ferocity, unleashing green fireballs the size of pavilions with its massive fists. The giant fireballs were imbued with formidable power, and even the three devilish lords were forced to evade them, not daring to oppose them head-on. As expected of a devilish beast that was comparable in power to a late body integration stage being, it truly wouldn't be an easy task for the three devilish lords to defeat. After ascertaining the situation, a faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he made a hand seal, following which a golden projection with 3 heads and 6 arms appeared behind him amid a burst of surging devilish chi.